The air in the garden tastes of bruised petals and ozone, a sensory warning that Lee-yeon ignores only by the grace of sheer, frantic will. She retreats with the desperate rhythm of a woman fleeing a burning building, her skin still prickling where his fingers had claimed her wrist. That touch, an imprint of a past she has been meticulously carving away, feels like a brand. She scrubs at her arm, a compulsive, jagged motion, trying to wipe away the phantom heat of a man who should not be here. In her mind, the last month had been a sanctuary, a quiet period of regrowth. Now, it feels like a thin veneer of glass that has just shattered under his sudden, terrifying weight. She forces herself to move with purpose, treating him as a cruel joke of fate, a look-alike nightmare she must outrun. But the rationalizations are brittle. Every step she takes toward the waiting vehicle feels weighted, as if the very soil of this estate is conspiring to hold her back. The mansion itself looms, a fortress of limestone and secrets, housing the brothers who own the horizon. The chauffeur, a man oblivious to the tectonic shift in her world, watches her approach with casual curiosity. He doesn't see the predator closing the distance behind her. He is coming. The sound of his stride, a rhythmic, predatory thud against the earth, breaks the silence of the garden. Lee-yeon's heart hammers against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She doesn't need to look back to know he is closing in, his long, lithe stride devouring the space between them. When she dives into the back of the sedan, the interior feels suddenly like a coffin. She barely has time to lock the door before a shadow swallows the light. Through the glass, he is a vision of controlled, terrifying mania. His palm slams against the window, the impact vibrating through the frame and settling into the marrow of her bones. He doesn't look like the man she knew. He looks like something feral, something unmoored from the human condition. His face is pressed to the tint, his eyes searching, hunting, sensing her pulse through the solid steel of the car door. His voice filters through the thick glass, distorted yet impossibly sharp, a command wrapped in a serrated edge. It is a promise of violence disguised as an invitation to talk. The roof of the car begins to buckle under the rhythmic, violent thuds of his fists. The chauffeur is paralyzed, a deer in the headlights of a human cyclone. Lee-yeon realizes then that he is not chasing her because he misses her. He is chasing her because he intends to shatter everything she has become, to drag her back into the wreckage of their history. The car surges forward, the tires spitting gravel, but the frantic, desperate pounding continues to echo against the trunk, a final, insistent claim that refuses to be left behind. She stares straight ahead, refusing to look at the side mirror, terrified that if she catches his eye just once more, the door will not be enough to keep the ghosts out. The sedan grinds to a halt, the silence that follows punctured by the frantic thrumming of hearts. Lee-yeon's head throbs where it met the upholstery, a dull, rhythmic ache that mirrors the chaos outside. Through the fractured glass, a silhouette rises from the dust, an apparition of unyielding, singular obsession. Kwon Chae-woo does not walk. He stalks the vehicle like a predator who has finally cornered his prey. The destruction of the car door is not a feat of strength, it is a declaration of intent. Glass shards rain down like frozen tears, catching the light as they settle against the driver's back. Chae-woo does not flinch. He is a man carved from ice and iron, his hands slick with a crimson lacquer that he ignores with chilling ease. When the lock clicks, the sound is a death knell for Lee-yeon's fragile sense of security. The atmosphere in the car shifts, growing heavy, electric, and stifling. Chae-woo leans in, his scent, a cocktail of cold sweat, motor oil, and the faint, haunting aroma of damp earth, invading her space. His hand, mapped in blood, hovers near her, a visceral warning that the man who once whispered endearments now only speaks in the language of damage. He is relentless, a force of nature that has forgotten how to be human. She fights to keep her resolve, but he is a tide that refuses to recede. He shuts the door on her denial, moving with a predator's patience to the other side. The scene transitions into a surreal, disjointed tableau. Ju-baek waits, but the reunion is tainted. The child stands rooted to the earth, a mirror of trauma, his eyes darting with a terrifying, rhythmic intensity. He speaks of transformations, a dog, a chicken, an owl monkey, a fragmented lexicon of survival learned in a place where human rules no longer applied. He is a boy who has had to calculate his own safety, a small, fragile thing trying to decipher the predatory hierarchy of the house he has been forced to inhabit. Lee-yeon watches him, the cold realization settling in her gut. She has walked into a house of mirrors where sanity is a luxury no one can afford. She turns to the architect of this madness. Kwon Chae-woo stands there, looking at her and the boy with a possessive, unsettling hunger. He is the master of this cage, the man who has turned a child's mind into a kaleidoscope of animalistic defense mechanisms. She reaches out, not in love, but in a desperate attempt to find a pulse of humanity in the debris. Chae-woo merely twitches, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips as he watches the panic flicker across her face. He is not horrified by the boy's metamorphosis. He is the one who pruned the tree, the one who dictated the shape of the growth. Lee-yeon realizes with a sickening clarity that she is not here to save the child. She is merely the latest, and perhaps the final, victim of the garden he has spent years cultivating in the dark. The question of who is the hunter and who is the hunted dissolves into the static of the afternoon heat. Lee-yeon stares into his eyes, looking for a shred of the man she once knew, only to find an abyss that stares back, waiting for her to stumble. The air between them is heavy, thick with the metallic tang of fresh blood and the suffocating pressure of a shared, ruined history. Ju-baek's chatter, a bizarre, fragile commentary on the lack of insects in this death trap of an estate, serves only to highlight the surreal nightmare unfolding on the gravel drive. Lee-yeon stands before the man who once anchored her world, but the man she sees now is a spectre of uncontained violence. Kwon Chae-woo is a study in internal collapse. His hands, still slick with the crimson evidence of his rage against the car window, twitch with a need that transcends desire. He is a predator who has forgotten how to be anything else, yet he finds himself paralyzed by the very woman he once discarded. The dynamic has shifted. The woman who once trembled in his presence now stands with a spine of steel, her words cutting through his ego with clinical precision. She reminds him, with the detachment of a stranger, that they are dead to one another. To her, he is a man who destroyed the music of their lives, the cello, the sacred trees, the devotion, and she demands the only thing left, the basic, cold courtesy of a stranger. Chae-woo is reeling. The Lee-yeon before him is not the soft, malleable memory he has been feeding on. She is sharp, brittle, and deeply repulsed. Every word she speaks acts like a vice, tightening around his throat, denying him the air of authority he is accustomed to. Then, he crosses a line that shifts the atmosphere from tension to something far more visceral. He pulls her close, the movement fluid and predatory. He uses his blooded hand to smudge a ruinous, crimson stain across the ivory skin of her neck, his calloused fingertips grazing the pulse point beneath her ear with an intimacy that is indistinguishable from a threat. He is marking her, re-establishing a claim that he has no right to hold. "Do you want to test my limits?" he whispers, his voice a low, vibrating tremor that bypasses her brain and strikes straight at her survival instinct. He watches her. He drinks in her reaction, the fluttering of her lashes, the ragged hitch in her breathing, the sheer terror that he has finally managed to elicit. It is a twisted form of nourishment. He is a man starving to death in a feast of his own making, and her fear is the only thing that makes him feel alive. Lee-yeon is trembling, caught in the furnace of his gaze. She reminds him of her own fragility, of the woman he once made tremble, hoping that by invoking the past, she can force him to retreat into the shadows of indifference. But Chae-woo's answer is a low, devastating admission. He remembers everything. And because he remembers, he refuses to be ignored. As he looms over her, his eyes burning with a raw, desperate hunger, the threat hangs in the silence. If she demands to be treated like a stranger, he will show her exactly how much of a stranger he is capable of becoming. The air is thick with the scent of ozone and the metallic tang of drying blood. Kwon Chae-woo stands amidst the wreckage of his own composure, his hand pressed against his cheek, a smear of red transferred from his own violence, like a warrior marking himself with the spoils of his own ruin. For months, he has lived in a phantom reality, a solitary confinement of his own making where she was the only occupant. Now that she is physically present, the friction between his memory and her reality has sparked a fire that threatens to consume them both. He wants her gone. He demands it with the desperation of a man staring into an abyss. He tells her the estate is a trap, a labyrinth of shifting allegiances and hidden knives, but his warnings are muffled by the frantic, ragged cadence of his own breathing. He is terrified of her proximity, yet he is the one who refuses to let her go. Lee-yeon's response is a masterpiece of icy detachment. She holds a contract, a scrap of paper, against his storm of volatile emotion, reminding him that his ego holds no jurisdiction here. As she turns away, the sound of her suitcase wheels against the gravel is a rhythmic, mocking heartbeat in the silence. It is the sound of a woman walking out of his life, again. Chae-woo reaches his breaking point. In a display of raw, unrestrained power, he heaves her suitcase toward the car. The impact is a violent fracture, a spiderweb of glass blossoming across the windshield as the car's alarm begins to wail, a discordant, mechanical scream that mirrors the chaos in his own mind. He corners her then, a shadow cast long by the dying light. His confession is not one of love, but of a predatory hunger he can no longer name. He speaks of never having learned to beg, of a life of indulgence that left him without the tools to repair the things he has broken. He leans in, his gaze a scalpel dissecting her composure. He seeks an echo of the woman he remembers in the rigid set of her pupils, but he finds only the sterile, dry dust of a woman who has moved on. The realization hits him with the force of a physical blow. He laughs, a low, hollow sound that drifts down like falling ash. "You abandoned me," he breathes, his voice devoid of heat, carrying the freezing finality of a winter tomb. To her, the end was a severance, a clean break. To him, it was a brand. He has spent these years defined by the wound she left behind, convinced that a break is merely a scar that never fades. As he looms over her, his eyes dark and hungry, he poses the question that has haunted the silence of his isolation. If he is the ghost that she has supposedly buried, why does her pulse quicken whenever he enters the room? He waits for her to tremble. He waits for her to show him that the scar still throbs. But as the alarm continues its relentless, piercing vigil, he realizes that the most terrifying thing about their meeting isn't that he has changed, but that she has, and in the process, she has become the only thing he cannot control. The garden has become a theater of the surreal, where the air hangs heavy with the scent of crushed foliage and the metallic tang of drying blood. Lee-yeon stands as an island of frigid resolve, her breath hitching not from fear, but from the exhausting absurdity of the man before her. Kwon Chae-woo is a ruin of a human, disheveled, blooded, and stained by the earth, his body a map of the violence he inflicted upon himself just to secure a moment of her time. It is Ji-baek who breaks the spell. The child, observant and disturbingly detached, wedges himself between them, his touch a gentle tether pulling Lee-yeon back to the rational world. He whispers of spiders and sacrifice, a dark, childish fable that hangs in the air like a curse. While the adults are consumed by the gravity of their own wreckage, the boy engages in his own cryptic rituals, blowing soft, warm breaths against Lee-yeon's skin, a small, desperate act of protection against the storm. Lee-yeon does not look back. She delivers her verdict with a finality that acts like a blade, severing the emotional umbilical cord that Chae-woo has been desperately trying to graft back onto her. She tells him that his turmoil is his own, a poison he must learn to distill without contaminating her. Every step she takes away from him is a victory, though her legs feel weighted by the gravity of their history. Chae-woo is left behind, a man literally and figuratively shattering. He stands where she stood, his feet tracing the impression she left in the dust. The irony is suffocating. He, who once held the world in his palm, is now a man with nowhere to go. He is astray, abandoned by his own obsession, watching the only thing that made him human drift beyond his reach. When his attendant, Jang Beam-hee, finally approaches, the air remains thick with the residue of his unraveling. The conversation is disjointed, a dance of half-truths and buried anxieties. The question arrives like a sniper's bullet, striking the heart of his delusion. Is he afraid? Not of the danger that lurks in the corners of the estate, or the political chess games of the Kwon family, but of the inevitable. Beam-hee forces him to confront the terrifying reality that Lee-yeon might be the only one capable of holding a mirror to his soul. He realizes, with a sickening jolt, that he is not the master of this house. He is a man bound in chains he forged himself, desperately praying that the lock never opens. If Lee-yeon wakes him, if she forces him to confront the truth of his own pathetic, tethered existence, will there be anything left of him to save? He stares into the void of the garden, his pupils dancing with the flicker of a flame about to be extinguished. The rain begins to fall, a cold, cleansing descent that hides the tears he refuses to acknowledge, while deep in the bowels of the estate, the clock on his sanity continues its relentless, deafening tick. The room is a sanctuary of hushed luxury, draped in the velvet shadows of an autumn evening. Lee-yeon sinks into the rocking chair, its rhythmic, wooden cadence a desperate attempt to pace away the phantom tremors still coursing through her limbs. The lace curtains flutter like trapped ghosts against the glass, and the deep, forest-toned wallpaper seems to absorb the light, insulating her from the chaos she left on the gravel drive. On the other end of the line, her confidant's voice is a lifeline, a tether to a reality where men don't smash car windows with their bare hands. Lee-yeon touches her stomach, a secret weight that anchors her, and her mind drifts to the impossibility of the future, a world where a child might grow up in the shadow of this house, where blood ties are more akin to shackles than bonds. The conversation is a fragile bridge over an abyss, but she can't help the cold sweat that beads on her brow. She isn't just worried about the present, she is mourning the past. The man she once loved is a summer heatwave, searing, intoxicating, and leaving the air breathless, but the man she met today is a winter frost, lethal and sharp. She fears the erosion of her own mind. She fears that the Kwon Chae-woo of today, with his erratic, possessive hunger, will eventually overwrite the soft-focused memory of the man she once surrendered her heart to. The transition to the dining hall is a descent into madness. The table is a stage set for a ritual, not a meal. Dozens of candles flicker in long, silver candlesticks, casting long, dancing shadows that make the white marble table look like a sacrificial altar. But it is the centerpiece that stops her breath. The fish are alive, vibrant, desperate, and twitching on the plates, their gills flapping in a silent, suffocating rhythm. It is a grotesque display of dominance, a reminder that in this house, even life is a commodity to be subdued and consumed. Kwon Chae-woo sits across from her, his presence a static charge in the room. He is the master of this theater of cruelty. When he speaks of the past, of shackles and tears, it is a scalpel stripping away her defenses, layer by agonizing layer. He isn't just talking to her, he is flaying her memories. Kwon Ki-suk watches with the detached amusement of a collector observing a particularly rare specimen. He speaks of contracts and records, his words a rhythmic torture designed to bind Lee-yeon to the table, to the chair, to the house itself. Chae-woo's hand moves with a terrifying, practiced grace. He takes the silver knife, cold, sterile, and lethal, and presses it against the fish's head, his knuckles turning white as he pins the frantic creature to the marble. He doesn't look at the fish. He looks at Lee-yeon, his eyes burning with a dark, predatory light. A sharp, wet pop echoes through the silent hall as the blade sinks deep. The fish's eye ruptures, a burst of fluid that mirrors the sudden, sickening snap of something fragile within Lee-yeon's resolve. The silence that follows is absolute, save for the flickering of the candles, which now seem less like light and more like the hungry eyes of the house, watching to see how much more of herself she is willing to let him break. The dining hall is a cavern of suffocating elegance, where the air is thick with the scent of lilies and the sharp, metallic tang of cold steel. At the center of the marble table lies the carnage, not of a hunt, but of a performance. Kwon Chae-woo's hands, relentless and mechanical, continue to drive his blade into the dying carp. Each downward stroke is measured, precise, and entirely devoid of mercy. He is not merely preparing a meal, he is reenacting a trauma, his knuckles pale and his gaze fixed on Lee-yeon with an intensity that feels like a physical weight against her skin. She sits opposite him, her presence in the room a fragile anomaly. She has dressed for a role she no longer plays, in a black dress that feels like armor, with a small pearl earring that pulses against her neck like a frantic heartbeat. Under the table, her hands are balled into fists, her nails biting into her palms to ground herself against the madness of the table. Kwon Ki-suk serves as the maestro of this discomfort. He moves with a predatory fluidity, his sleeves rolled back to reveal forearms corded with muscle, his movements at the cutting board a chilling display of expertise. He dissects the fish with a surgical detachment that makes the room feel increasingly brittle, as if the entire structure could shatter under the weight of his composure. The brothers engage in a dialogue that is less about food and more about the boundaries of their own savagery. Ki-suk speaks of the primal, of the bloodlines that define them, and of the raw, tearing instincts that Chae-woo has allegedly harbored since childhood. Lee-yeon watches, her lower lip caught between her teeth, realizing that the man she once knew, the man she thought she had protected and guided, is a stranger who has been living in the dark spaces of his own heritage. The tension spikes when Chae-woo interrupts, his voice a low vibration that cuts through the sterile atmosphere. He is challenging his brother, but his eyes remain locked on Lee-yeon, a silent threat embedded in every flicker of his gaze. She covers the still-twitching life on her plate with a linen napkin, a desperate, childish attempt to hide the cruelty of the house from her own sight. Beneath the linen, the world remains dark. She thinks of the secret she carries, a life just beginning to bloom, and the terror of it being found in this hall of predators becomes a cold, paralyzing stone in her gut. When Ki-suk pivots to her future, to the mundanity of a life she hopes to reclaim, to the idea of love, marriage, and children, the question lands like a trapdoor. She feels the shift in the room instantly. The atmosphere curdles. She speaks of an ordinary life, of meeting someone decent, of finding happiness. But as the words leave her lips, she feels the gaze of the man across from her sharpen, his knife hovering over the cutting board, the blade catching the candlelight. In the silence that follows, the crystal glass in her hand seems to vibrate. She has mentioned the one thing that could turn this cage into a tomb, and in the sudden, predatory stillness, She realizes that the brothers are not just waiting for their meal. They are waiting for her to make the one mistake that will bind her to them forever. The atmosphere in the dining hall had curdled into something thick and suffocating, far removed from the warmth of a shared meal. Lee-yeon's skin crawled, an involuntary physical reaction to the perverse civility radiating from the brothers. Kwon Chae-woo, ever the architect of this psychological maze, spoke of erasing her past with the casual authority of a man deleting a line of code. He offered to curate her future, to vet her suitors, to hunt her ghosts, as if she were a precious, fragile asset that needed protection from her own poor taste. The irony was not lost on her. The man who had once been her jailer now played the role of a well-meaning guardian, his words laced with a terrifying sense of ownership. Beside him, Kwon Chae-woo was a study in volatile silence until he wasn't. When he laughed, the sound was jagged, lacking any true mirth, a sound stitched into his face like the raw edges of a surgical wound. He didn't just agree to help vet her future suitors. He practically salivated at the prospect of drawing their likenesses, a thinly veiled promise of violence against anyone who dared to claim what he still considered his. Then came the ritual of the fish. Chae-woo, with his long, slender fingers, dismantled the grilled carcass with a chilling, surgical efficiency. He stripped the bones, extracted the thorns, and pushed the plate toward her. It was an act of domesticity so jarringly out of place against the backdrop of his earlier savagery that it felt like an insult. He refused to eat, his own pallor intensifying, his throat working with agonizing effort just to swallow a sip of water, as if he were purging a toxin from his system. The focus shifted to the main house, a transition Lee-yeon clung to like a lifeline. Work was safe. Work was objective. But Chae-wook's directive shattered that sanctuary. He spoke of a grand renovation, a large-scale clearing of the garden behind the cottage. The scale of the project was excessive, a vanity undertaking that felt less like landscaping and more like the construction of a grave. Chae-woo's commentary, however, cut through the tension with the precision of a razor. He described the ideal garden not as a place of beauty, but as a trap, a space designed to entice, to allure, to hide. When Lee-yeon dared to ask the nature of the event that required such a sinister backdrop, the air in the room seemed to vanish. Chae-woo, his knife still gripped in his hand, his eyes burning with a dark, mocking intensity, leaned forward. The smile he offered was not one of warmth, but of absolute, chilling malice. He didn't describe a gala, a summit, or a celebration. He described a den of raw, unchecked indulgence. The weight of his words hit Lee-yeon harder than a physical blow. She realized then that she wasn't being asked to garden. She was being asked to build the stage for an obscenity, and the brothers were watching her reaction with the hungry patience of spiders. The ancient wisdom of the married woman's existence, 3 years of silence, 3 years of deafness, and 3 years of servitude, rings with a bitter, hollow irony in Lee-yeon's ears. She is not a wife, but she is serving a sentence in the gilded cage of the Kwon estate, tasked with cultivating beauty for a garden destined to host the most grotesque of sins. The guest list reads like a roll call of the nation's untouchable elite, a rogues gallery of power brokers who find their pleasure in the dark, transactional, and perverse. As she stands in the sprawling, desolate yard, she doesn't see trees or flora. She sees the stage for an obscenity. The absurdity of it threatens to break her, yet the life blossoming within her remains a singular, defiant anchor. She touches her abdomen, a silent vow to a future she hopes to claim far from the rot of this house. Meanwhile, in the liminal spaces of his own fractured mind, Kwon Chae-woo suffers. Sleep is a casualty of his obsession. When he does find it, he finds only ghosts. He clings to the phantom of Lee-yeon, her skin in his dreams a temperature that is neither warm nor cold, a haunting reminder of the woman he once devoured with his lips. He clings to this apparition like a drowning man to a leaden weight, terrified that letting go will reveal the absolute void he has become. His brother, Kwon Chae-woo, moves through the estate with the chilling, reptilian grace of a predator who has never known the burden of a human impulse. He notes Chae-woo's gaunt features, his refusal to eat, and suggests a remedy, the introduction of a woman to bring balance to the chaos. The irony is a blade that cuts both ways. Chae-woo, a man who has never touched a soul, proposes intimacy as if it were a medicinal prescription. Then, the illusion shatters. Kwon Chae-woo's gaze drifts across the garden, finding the living, breathing Lee-yeon as she hauls a ladder across the lawn. The shift in the room is instantaneous. Chae-woo's world constricts, his reaction primal, a violent kick to the table, a sudden, jagged surge of adrenaline. The tablet hits the ground with a dull thud, a mechanical casualty of his sudden, frantic possessiveness. He bristles, his entire frame vibrating with a jealousy that he refuses to name. But Kisuk is unflappable, his smile a thin, surgical line of amusement. He speaks of Lee-yeon as an asset, a pawn that has served the family's desires too well to be discarded. The air between the brothers is electric, heavy with the scent of ozone and impending violence. Chae-woo realizes that he is not just fighting his own memories, he is competing with his own kin for the right to control her. He stares at the garden where Lee-yeon walks, oblivious to the fact that she has become the fulcrum upon which the entire family's twisted legacy now pivots, and that the garden she is planting for their debauchery may very well become the site of their final, inevitable collision. The air inside the Kwon estate is not merely oxygen. It is a pressurized, volatile compound of secrets and suffocating history. For Kwon Chae-woo, the world has become a tilted plane, a precarious architecture of contradiction where he is both the captor and the captive of his own fractured psyche. He watches Lee-yeon from the periphery, a predator pretending to be a spectator, observing her rhythmic, mechanical labor in the garden as if he could harvest the secrets of her soul by watching her prune a branch. He knows the game. If Lee-yeon is the bait, then the trap is far more intricate than simple vengeance. His brother, Kisuk, remains the shadow architect, pulling strings that Chae-woo can feel but cannot yet see. The urge to act, to hunt, to reclaim, to destroy, is a constant, thrumming fever in his blood. But for Lee-yeon, the complexity of the mansion fades into a singular, animalistic need. The pregnancy has turned her once predictable appetite into a ravenous, unruly master. It is an ache that transcends hunger. It is a primal urge for sustenance that renders her vulnerable. Driven by the sharp, stinging desire for something as simple as eggs and tomatoes, she ventures into the labyrinthine darkness of the estate, a moth drawn toward a light she knows is predatory. She does not get far. The darkness coalesces into a form she knows too well. Chae-woo emerges from the shadows, his demeanor an unsettling departure from his earlier, jagged volatility. He is calm, a terrifying docility that mirrors the man she once knew before the rot took hold. He offers guidance, his voice a low, smooth friction against the stillness of the autumn night. She follows, her resolve a brittle thing, her footsteps echoing in a hall that seems to stretch into infinity. The deception is masterfully executed. The path does not lead to the servants' quarters. It leads into the deep, unmapped gut of the mansion, where the walls seem to pulse with the weight of decades of corruption. In an instant, the air vanishes. A hand, firm and possessive, anchors her from behind. She is lifted, her resistance neutralized by the sheer, effortless strength of his embrace. It is a motion of practiced intimacy, the way he gathers her into his space, the way his palm presses against her, just below her chest, just above the secret she is trying to guard. The scent of him, once her sanctuary, is now a stifling shroud, thick with the irony of his vow of safety. "Tonight," he whispers, the vibration of his voice traveling through the marrow of her bones. "All you have to do is sleep with me." The corridor is dark, long, and silent, but the rhythm of his heart, a frantic, uneven gallop against her back, tells the truth his calm voice denies. He is holding her like a life raft, and as he walks deeper into the bowels of the estate, Lee-yeon realizes that the trap hasn't just closed, it has started to tighten. The room is a cold, sterile sanctuary, and as the lock clicks into place, Lee-yeon realizes she has been brought into the heart of the spider's web. Chae-woo does not treat her like a guest, but like a prize he has finally wrestled back from the void. When he sets her down, the transition is abrupt, the floor beneath them unyielding and frigid, mirroring the sudden, sharp drop in the temperature of the room. He looms over her, a man possessed by a hunger that has shifted from simple predation to something more complex, more agonizingly desperate. His gaze is a physical weight, pinning her against the white, pristine sheets of the bed, a surface that feels less like a place for rest and more like an operating table. The conflict between them is not just a disagreement, it is a collision of realities. Lee-yeon fights him with the raw, vibrating fury of a woman who has already laid her heart in a grave. She screams the name of the man she loved, weaponizing her grief, hurling it at him as a shield. Every time she invokes the memory of her husband, the man he claims to be yet refuses to recognize, she is carving a canyon between them. She is telling him that the man she cherished is dead, and this version of him, this dark, twisted echo, is nothing more than an intruder wearing his skin. Chae-woo hears her, and the cruelty he projects is merely the thin, fragile crust over an abyss of jealousy. The name, her husband, tastes like ash and honey on her tongue, and it drives him into a frenzy of possessive, clinical madness. In a blur of motion, the polite facade vanishes. There is no negotiation. With a terrifying, efficient grace, he traps her, his limbs pinning her own, his movements so swift they leave her breathless and reeling. As he secures her wrists to the headboard, the elastic bands acting as soft, mocking shackles, the room descends into a stifling, heavy silence. He is relentless, his voice a low, raspy friction against the frantic beat of her own pulse. She rails against his selfishness, against the audacity of his kidnapping, against the man who once discarded her and now demands her submission. She is a woman on the edge of a breakdown, her eyes brimming with the salt of exhaustion and deep-seated, unshakable sorrow. When she cries out in her frustration, her voice breaking as she confesses to a hunger that goes deeper than the physical, Chae-woo pauses. He is a man caught between the desire to shatter her resistance and a nascent, terrifying impulse to soothe the very wounds he has inflicted. He tilts her chin upward, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a possessiveness that is both reverent and violent. He ignores her pleas, he ignores the wreckage of their history, and instead, he fixates on a single, dangerous detail. The hunger she claims is driving her to tears. His eyes go cold, the darkness behind them sharpening into a predatory, narrow focus. The question he poses is not one of concern, but a demand for the truth of her appetites, a question that hangs in the air, electric and lethal. Who was it, he asks, that she was truly craving? The tension in the room is a physical weight, thick with the scent of his skin and the sour, desperate tang of Lee-yeon's own frustration. His hands are everywhere, a frantic, uncoordinated search for a rival that does not exist. He accuses her of infidelity with imaginary suitors, his jealousy manifesting in guttural, dark-humored threats. He is a man starving for a context he can no longer find, convinced that her late-night prowling is a pursuit of other men when, in truth, it is a pursuit of basic survival. Then, the absurdity reaches its breaking point. He bites at her ear, a predatory act that devolves into an unhinged, confusing interrogation about her desires. Lee-yeon, caught in the chaotic slipstream of hormonal volatility and profound grief, finally snaps. Her tears aren't for the man holding her captive, they are for the tomatoes, for the scrambled eggs, for the simple, domestic life that has been ripped from her grasp and replaced with this nightmare of shadows and silver knives. Her lament is a surreal symphony of culinary longing. She wails about eggs, chicken eggs, and the simple comfort of mixing them with milk, while he, trapped in a narcissistic spiral of insecurity, misinterprets every word as a sexual challenge. The dark humor of the moment is palpable, a sharp contrast to the cold, locked room. He is ready to wage war on her behalf, ready to dismantle the estate to find her, all because she is crying over a breakfast she hasn't had. The reversal is total. The kidnapper becomes the steward. He kicks the door open, demanding sustenance with the fierce, irrational authority of a man who would burn the world down to quiet her sobs. And so, the strange peace descends. The night ends with the clinking of china and the smell of warm butter and acidic citrus. She eats, not with joy, but with the hollow, ravenous focus of the desperate, and then, the exhaustion that follows a trauma-induced fever dream takes them both. They collapse into sleep, a fragile, stolen truce in the heart of the beast's lair. When morning arrives, it is a harsh, golden intruder. Kwon Chae-woo wakes to find the room bathed in light and the reality of his own defeat staring back at him. He watches her, this woman who has turned his carefully curated misery into a scene of domestic absurdity, and he tastes the remnants of her meal on his own tongue. He has lost this battle. He has provided the comfort he once sought to destroy. For Lee-yeon, the awakening is a cruel trick of the subconscious. For a heartbeat, the sunlight, the warmth, and the weight of his presence convince her she is home in Hwaido. She smiles, a soft, involuntary ghost of the woman she used to be, and for that single, treacherous second, she reaches out. But the light in his eyes is not the warmth of her husband. It is the cold, sharp steel of a stranger. The illusion shatters. She bolts, the reality of her captivity snapping back into place with a violent, sickening thud. She leaves him behind in the wreckage of the morning, blaming her betrayal on her body, on her hormones, on the weakness of her own heart. She flees, but the imprint of his touch remains, a permanent mark on the skin she tries so desperately to forget. The trap is still set. And now, she knows that even in her dreams, she is no longer safe. The morning light hits the estate with a clinical, unforgiving glare, exposing every meticulously cultivated inch of the garden. Lee-yeon stands amidst her creation, a landscape she has curated with the desperate precision of a woman trying to bury her own identity beneath layers of botanical symbolism. She moves with a stiff, professional grace, guiding the Kwon brothers through paths lined with camellias, the blossoms of secretive, dangerous love. The garden is a grotesque masquerade. She has selected specimens that mimic the human form, an unsettling collection of flora that mirror the anatomy of desire. There are magnolias that evoke a sharp, physiological response and oaks that seem to writhe in an eternal, arboreal embrace. As she explains her choices, her cheeks burn with a heat that has nothing to do with the sun. Kwon Chae-woo drifts through the displays with the detached amusement of a man touring a gallery of curiosities, his questions layered with double meanings that make the air grow thin. Beside him, Kwon Chae-woo is a static charge of barely contained violence, his eyes tracking Lee-yeon with an intensity that feels like a physical invasion. When she arrives at the chestnut tree, the air curdles. The scent, a biological, heavy musk, triggers a memory she has fought to suppress. She falters, her professional veneer fraying as she tries to justify her choices, but the words turn to ash in her mouth. Every flower she introduces, the greedy snapdragon, the relentless solanum, is a mirror held up to the brother's own distorted nature. The deeper they walk, the more the memories bleed into the present. Lee-yeon's mind fractures. She is suddenly transported to a time when these same symbols were not merely decorative, but tactile and all-consuming. She feels the phantom weight of Chae-woo's hands, the suffocating proximity of a past that refuses to stay buried. She is trapped in a loop, explaining the botany of a sex party to the very men who have orchestrated it, while her own history threatens to drown her. Chae-wook's sudden invitation to the evening's festivities hits like a siren. He wants her on display, a human accessory to be trotted out for the elite, but Chae-woo shuts the door with a sharp, possessive violence. His glare is a brand, a warning that she belongs only to the shadows he constructs for her. Night falls, and the estate begins to wake with the arrival of the vultures. Lee-yeon retreats to the periphery, fueled by a deep, hollow longing that chicken and cold routine cannot satisfy. Her hunger has evolved. It is no longer just for food, but for the ghost of a domesticity that no longer exists, for the simple, quiet taste of a life she can never reclaim. Just as the exhaustion begins to take hold, the radio crackles to life, cutting through the heavy, humid night. The garden, her carefully orchestrated stage, is failing. Something is wrong with the trees, an error that requires her immediate, solitary attention. She takes the radio, her pulse jumping. She moves into the darkness of the garden, unaware that she is not walking toward a repair, but toward the final, hidden corner of the trap. The trees she planted to represent welcome and greed now loom over her like silent, judging specters, and as she reaches the site of the reported flaw, she realizes that the security report was never about a tree at all. It was a call. And someone is waiting in the dark. The villa at midnight is a place of shifting dimensions. By day, it is a structure of stone and silence, but under the shroud of darkness, it transforms into a living, breathing organism of excess. As Lee-yeon navigates the camellia forest, the air is no longer crisp. It is thick, perfumed with a cloying scent of desperation and high-end intoxicants. She clutches her silk bag of tools like a talisman, her only anchor in a world that has discarded all pretense of morality. The garden has become a stage for a bacchanal. Every shadow hides a coupling, every alcove a secret transaction. It is a spectacle of the untouchable, men who dictate the laws of the nation now wandering barefoot, their suits abandoned, their dignity dissolved in the bottom of a glass. Their laughter is not human. It is the rhythmic, discordant baying of predators who have finally found a place where they do not need to hide. Lee-yeon reaches the site of the reported damage, only to find the arboreal casualties of the night. Branches are snapped with violent, careless force, the remnants of a frantic, limb-tangling urgency that makes her pulse stutter. As she kneels to mend the broken limbs of her trees, the reality of the scene presses in on her. She realizes the architectural role these branches played in the night's debauchery, and the heat of her own embarrassment blooms across her skin, a desperate attempt to ignore the echoes of what took place beneath the canopy. When she looks up, she sees him. Kwon Chae-woo stands in the center of the chaos, an anomaly in a sea of abandonment. He is buttoned to the collar, his expression a mask of detached, chilling indifference. He stands apart, a solitary figure playing with a silver lighter, the rhythmic click-clack of its lid the only steady beat in a room filled with erratic, breathless moans. He is younger than she had dared to imagine, his youth a sharp, jarring contrast to the aged, curdled souls around him. The scene is a fever dream of contradictions. A woman, draped in diamonds and indifference, presses herself against another, her eyes locked on Chae-woo with the predatory hunger of a bird of prey. The crowd roars, a collective, animalistic sound, while he remains as cold and immovable as a statue carved from winter. Lee-yeon watches him, and for the first time, the man she once thought she knew is completely erased. The boy she buried in her memories never existed. There is only this stranger, this prince of a decaying kingdom who finds no pleasure in the indulgence surrounding him, yet remains its primary architect. The pity she feels for him is a cold, sharp blade, cutting through the romantic remnants of her past. She realizes that the distance between her, a woman who nurtures life, and these people who treat the world as a broken branch is a chasm that can never be bridged. She turns to flee the suffocating reality of his world, her mind spinning with the implications of what she has witnessed. But the night is not finished with her. A sharp, primal sound breaks behind her, a gasp that is not of pleasure, but of intrusion. She wheels around, her heart hammering against her ribs, and finds herself inches from a wall of exposed, heated skin. The air is suddenly dominated by the scent of musky, unfiltered adrenaline. She looks up, her eyes widening, only to find that the safety of her shadows has vanished, and the revelry has finally come to claim her. The garden of the villa has ceased to be a place of botany and has become an arena of raw, human predation. Lee-yeon, her fingers stinging from a jagged cut against her own pruning shears, finds herself caught in the slipstream of a world that views dignity as a costume to be stripped away. The scent of spilled alcohol and artificial musk is suffocating, a sensory assault that precedes the arrival of a man whose smile is as hollow and sharp as a broken bottle. He drags her not with the grace of a suitor, but with the tethering grip of a hunter securing his prize. Lee-yeon fights, her movements frantic and desperate, but the bag she carries, once a symbol of her craft, is now a blunt weapon against the encroaching darkness. Her kicks to his calf are met not with pain, but with a sickening, jubilant grin. He has found his entertainment for the night, and in his eyes, Lee-yeon is nothing more than a new piece for a game of ritualized humiliation. He forces a mask upon her face. In an instant, the world constricts into a singular, claustrophobic point of view. She is thrust into the center of the revelry, the silence that falls over the crowd more terrifying than the noise that preceded it. They are no longer men and women. They are a collective, predatory gaze, peeling away her composure layer by layer. Through the narrow slit of the mask, her world narrows down to one point of gravity, Kwon Chae-woo. He sits in the heart of the chaos, a predator watching the trap snap shut. As he observes her, bleeding, trembling, and bound to a stranger, his reaction is a chilling descent into visceral instability. He leans forward, his posture shifting from languid indifference to a predatory, surgical focus. He spits into his glass, and as the liquid hits the crystal, it carries the metallic, copper tang of blood. His tongue, a flickering red spark, betrays a hunger that has moved beyond simple possession into something far more ancient and violent. The man holding Lee-yeon speaks of a game. A game of tag. A game of attrition where the prize is money and the currency is one's own skin. The rules are simple, degrading, and designed to strip away everything until only the raw, shivering truth of the individual remains beneath the layers of silk and shame. Lee-yeon's breath hitches, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird desperate for an exit that no longer exists. The absurdity of the game, the promise of riches for the woman who can endure the stripping of her own layers, is a fevered dream of malice. Just as the implications of the ultimatum sear themselves into her mind, the air is split by a violent, shattering sound. A glass, flung from the darkness of the periphery with the speed of a bullet, tears through the atmosphere. It detonates against the stone inches from them, spraying fragments of crystal like a rain of diamonds across the manicured grass. The game has been interrupted, but not by a savior. The tension in the air snaps, and for the first time, Chae-woo stands up. The room holds its breath as the predator decides whether to join the hunt or destroy the hunter. The shatter of glass was the signal for chaos to bleed into the night. It wasn't just a tumbler breaking, it was the fragile membrane of civility tearing apart, replaced by the primitive urge to run. Lee-yeon didn't wait for the resolution of the violence. She turned, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, and vanished into the labyrinth of the estate. The garden, once her sanctuary, transformed into a cavern of darkness as the lights were snuffed out, plunging the revelers into a blind, stumbling hunt. She moved by instinct, navigating the shadows of the camellia forest not by sight, but by the memory of the earth beneath her feet. She climbed, her fingers raw and bleeding, the bark of the tallest tree offering a brittle safety. From her perch, she watched the estate become a riotous swarm of predators, all trampling the life she had cultivated, all staring at the ground, unaware that their prey was watching from the sky. But then, she saw him. He was the only one not looking at the dirt. His eyes, burning with a cold, singular intensity, pierced the darkness and locked onto hers. In that gaze, she saw no salvation, only a familiar, terrifying hunger. He wasn't one of them, yet he was the most dangerous of them all. He began to ascend. He moved with an unnatural grace, defying the gravity that held the others to the forest floor. He was a creature of kinetic lethality, closing the distance between them with the silent, predatory efficiency of a leopard. When he reached her, the silence between them was heavier than the chaos below. He didn't ask, he commanded. He pinned her in place, his grip a searing brand of iron and desperation. He pulled her into the suffocating proximity of his own body, his face burying into the crook of her neck. He was shivering, his skin slick with a cold, frantic sweat that belied the burning heat of his touch. He breathed her in, a sound that hung somewhere between agony and salvation. When she tried to challenge him, the promise of violence fell from his lips, cold and absolute. He spoke not of his own desires, but of a butchery yet to come, a vow to punish every man who had dared to touch her, to harvest their fingers as retribution for their audacity. Lee-yeon went cold. The terror of the party guests paled in comparison to the chilling, proprietary fury radiating from the man holding her. She whispered the truth of their shared history, the wreckage of the life he had systematically dismantled, piece by piece. She felt him stiffen. The warmth of his breath against her skin, which had been the only steady thing in the darkness, suddenly vanished. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers with a desperate, fractured clarity. The silence that followed was not the absence of sound, but the sound of something inside him, something long buried and jagged, finally starting to break. The night air has turned from humid to electric, a static charge that hums against the skin. Beneath the canopy of the forest, the distance between them has collapsed into something far more dangerous than physical proximity. Lee-yeon fights him, not with words, but with the raw, jagged repulsion of a woman who has been systematically unmade by the very man who now holds her. She presses her face against the bark, seeking the indifference of nature, but his hands, possessive and uncompromising, claim her once more, settling her onto his lap with a finality that admits no dissent. He is a study in volatile contradictions. One moment, he is a man of chilling, measured malice, and the next, he is a creature vibrating with a hunger so profound it borders on madness. When she bites him, a sharp, instinctive act of defense, his reaction is not to strike back, but to sharpen. The way his heartbeat drums against her own is a frantic, uneven rhythm that betrays a man losing his grip on his own restraint. He is not trying to save her in any way she understands. He is maneuvering through a geopolitical game of shadows, manipulating the very fabric of the estate's depravity to secure a window of time. While he coordinates with unseen ghosts in the dark, hunting dogs of his own design tracking the illicit trade happening just yards away, his focus never leaves her. To him, the massive, clandestine transaction occurring in the cottages is merely a distraction, a 20-minute lull in a war that he is waging on her behalf, and perhaps against her own will. The transformation is sudden. He tears away his own attire, his movements jagged and desperate, effectively turning his own body into a shield. He is stripping away his status, his civility, and his armor, forcing them into a state of vulnerable, exposed silence. He demands she mirror his deception, effectively making her a ghost in his clothing, a secret tucked into the heart of his own illicit mission. As he prepares to descend, the transition from the high branches to the forest floor is a sickening, adrenaline-fueled drop. Lee-yeon clings to him, a reflexive, animalistic need to anchor herself to the only steady point in a world that has dissolved into madness. And then, the mask of the predator slips. As they touch the earth, he does not move to strike. He takes her injured, bleeding hand into his mouth. He draws on her fingers with a rhythmic, steady pressure, the metallic tang of her blood mixing with the cooling sweat of his skin. It is an act that defies categorization, part penance, part possessive marking. In the shadow of the trees, hidden from the eyes of the revelers who scour the ground below for their next victim, Lee-yeon realizes the truth. He is not just catching her. He is absorbing her. And the next 20 minutes will be the longest, most dangerous descent of her life. The forest floor was a theater of shadows, but in the small sanctuary behind the tree, the world had shrunk to the point of a wound. Kwon Chae-woo held Lee-yeon's hand with a terrifying, possessive reverence, his mouth working over her injured finger as if he were trying to draw the very trauma from her veins. There was no gentleness in it, only a frantic, rhythmic suction that turned the metallic tang of her blood into a shared, intoxicating secret. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic cadence matching the pulse he pressed against her skin. She was shivering, not from the cold, but from the realization that he was unraveling. His focus was fractured, his eyes clouded with an intensity that burned through the mask of his indifference. When he finally drew back, a faint, crimson ghost of her essence lingered on his tongue, a mark of ownership that sent a jolt of pure, disorienting electricity through her. The illusion of their refuge was shattered by the sound of glass splintering against stone. Out of the darkness stumbled a man whose smile had been replaced by the jagged reality of a broken wine bottle. He was a portrait of depravity, his features stained with wine and something else, a white, powdery residue that spoke of heightened senses and decaying judgment. He had come to reclaim his prize, waving the mask like a flag of conquest, his voice a guttural demand for the game to continue. Lee-yeon expected Chae-woo to retreat. Instead, he simply stood. The shift was instantaneous. The man who had been meticulously cleaning her wounds vanished, replaced by a force of nature that moved with cold, predatory efficiency. He didn't flinch as the attacker lunged. He intercepted, his movements a blur of lethal grace. He seized the man by the throat, a single, fluid motion that silenced the drunken taunts into a wet, choking rattle. He didn't just fight, he deconstructed his opponent. With the same glass shard that had been used to threaten them, he began a terrifying interrogation. The scene was clinical, grotesque, and chillingly intimate. Chae-woo was not merely punishing the man, he was rewriting the narrative of the night. He forced the shattered glass into the attacker's mouth, a perverse mouthpiece that tasted of iron and retribution. The air grew heavy with the scent of copper and the panicked, rhythmic gasps of a man losing his life to his own hubris. Chae-woo leaned in close, his voice a soft, poisonous velvet that cut through the drug-addled confusion of his victim. He wasn't looking for an answer, he was imposing a new reality. He didn't want the man to see the victim, he wanted him to see the architect of his ruin. When the man's eyes rolled back, caught in the grip of a terror that finally burned through the fog of his intoxication, Chae-woo slipped the mask over his own face. The transition was absolute. He turned to Lee-yeon, his silhouette tall and imposing against the chaotic backdrop of the encroaching crowd. He didn't look back at the broken figure he left behind. He leaned in, his voice a mere vibration against her ear, a final, chilling instruction. He was no longer her captor, nor her tormentor. He had become the monster she was now forced to protect. As the shadows of the revelers began to close in, he melted into the darkness, leaving Lee-yeon to stand alone in the wreckage, a ghost in the machine of his making, waiting for the clock to run out. The air in the garden has grown heavy, saturated with the metallic tang of spilled wine and the nauseating scent of human malice. Kwon Chae-woo stands at the center of the storm, his composure a jagged, brittle wall. For a flicker of a second, the mask of the predator slips, and there is an apology in his eyes, a quiet, fractured thing that acknowledges the cruelty of the world he has dragged her into. But then, the moment is pulverized by a roar of laughter. Do Kyung-jin, his face a ruin of broken bottle glass and drug-induced euphoria, has turned the hunt into a public spectacle. The revelers descend like locusts. They tear at Chae-woo's skin with manic glee, their fingers tracing his ribs and clutching at his clothes, desperate to strip away the enigma of his stoicism. He does not fight them. He lets the wine drench his skin and the insults lash his face, his silence acting as a beacon that draws their cruelty closer, keeping them blind to the invisible threads of his true mission. But then, the atmosphere shifts. The mechanical crackle of the in-ear device dies, replaced by a cold, sharp intrusion. Kwon Chae-woo emerges from the darkness, immaculate in a three-piece suit that contrasts violently with the carnage he drags behind him. He holds a firearm with the casual lethality of a man who views life as an optional accessory. He targets the communication link, the sudden detonation of sound through the device sending a wave of agony through Chae-woo's ears. The crowd gasps, paralyzed by the sudden shift from debauchery to execution. Chae-woo levels the barrel of his gun, not at the brother he despises, but at the very air between them. Lee-yeon moves before she can think. Her heart is a frantic bird against her ribs as she tears through the wall of bodies. She reaches Chae-woo just as the world threatens to tilt into total violence. With hands that refuse to stop trembling, she lunges for the buckle of his trousers. The fabric gives way, a desperate, performative surrender designed to derail the gaze of a man looking for a reason to kill. The sound of the gun's discharge is swallowed by the silence of the crowd. Lee-yeon stands before the man who has haunted her darkest memories, her fingers lingering against the grain of his reality. She is forced to become the very thing she abhors, an actor in their sick play, to buy him the seconds he needs to keep his footing. Chae-woo is reeling, his eardrum shattered, his vision swimming in a haze of internal trauma. He is a masterpiece of degradation, bruised and stained, yet in his eyes, there is a terrifying, singular focus on the woman who has just stepped into the firing line to save him. She turns to the crowd, her voice a fragile blade cutting through the humid, suffocating night. She speaks of rules and games, her words a lie told to protect the only truth that remains, that they are both trapped in a house built of trash and blood. As she pulls away, leaving him exposed to the collective stare of the elite, the game is technically over. But as she looks back at the man who has traded his dignity for her survival, she realizes that the ending she just authored is only the beginning of a much deeper descent. She has touched the monster, and now, the monster is looking back at her with a hunger that no amount of sacrifice can satisfy. The confrontation with Kwon Chae-woo was a razor-thin escape, a desperate negotiation of shadows and steel. Lee-yeon had leveraged the very chaos of the night to bargain for her exit, shielding the broken remnants of the communication equipment with a cunning that felt foreign, even to her. As the estate's lights flickered back to life, exposing the wreckage of the bacchanal, she stood under the cold, clinical gaze of her employer, her spirit retreating into a hollow, unreachable space. She had survived, but the woman who walked out of those gates was not the one who had entered. She was stained, a secret participant in a theater of cruelty, forever marked by the scent of blood and the phantom weight of a stranger's touch. In the days that followed, the sun brought a deceptive peace. Lee-yeon retreated into the world of botany, attempting to bury the trauma in the silent, predictable growth of her trees. But memory is not a plant that dies in the winter. It merely lies dormant. In the quiet hours, when her focus wavered, the image of Kwon Chae-woo, not as the cold nobleman, but as the bruised, bleeding, and desperate creature who had used his own body as a shield, would haunt the margins of her consciousness. Her life had become a series of physical absences. There was a gnawing, inexplicable void within her, a hunger that defied the nourishment she dutifully consumed for the sake of the life burgeoning in her womb. Her colleagues watched her with growing concern, noting the way she stared into the middle distance, distracted by an appetite that no earthly meal could satisfy. Her mind constantly returned to the grafting of trees, the way two disparate entities could be fused to create something entirely new, something with two tastes in one body. It was a metaphor that kept her awake in the suffocating silence of her bedroom. She wondered about the man who was both predator and protector, the one who had abandoned her only to be shattered for her sake. Who was he, truly? What was he trying to become in that garden of monsters? One night, the void became a presence. She woke to the sensation of a weight shifting in the room. A shadow stood against the velvet dark of the window, and silhouette so absolute it seemed to drink the moonlight. Her pulse leaped, a frantic bird in her chest, as she recognized the intruder. He smelled of metallic tang, old bruises, and the damp earth of a place she had tried to erase. He was standing there like a statue carved from the very night, his face a map of the violence he had endured since they last spoke. The mask he wore was not for the party, but for the world. As he drew it down, his eyes locked onto hers with a devastating, primal intensity. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a magnetic tension that made her skin prickle. She asked, her voice barely a tremor in the dark, if he had come to claim her again, a question of fear, yet layered with a treacherous, undeniable relief. He denied the violence of his intent, but his gaze did not waver. He seemed transfixed by her, his head tilting with the curiosity of a beast encountering a familiar scent. His attention drifted, falling with laser-like precision to the gentle swell of her stomach. A profound, suffocating silence filled the space between them as he asked the question that stripped away every remaining layer of her deception. "Just what," he whispered, his voice like the grinding of stones, "is in your stomach?" The room is suffocating, a vacuum where the only sound is the frantic rhythm of Lee-yeon's heart. When Kwon Chae-woo's hand drifts toward her waist, the air turns brittle, ready to shatter at the slightest provocation. His inquiry about the life growing within her, a question phrased with the sharp edge of a blade, is met with a desperate, frantic recoil. But when he pivots, his words softening into a mundane inquiry about her evening meal, the release of tension is so violent it leaves her breathless, shivering beneath the heavy shroud of her own blankets. She carries the secret of her child like a fragile lantern in a gale, a life tethered only to her own name, her own history, her own soul. The memory of the party, with its cocktail of gunpowder, chemical highs, and moral decay, has only calcified her resolve. She will not let the rot of the Kwon dynasty touch this child. She must remain an island, solitary and fortified, regardless of the man who keeps bleeding into the margins of her life. Kwon Chae-woo is a man coming apart at the seams. He grips his mask, a jagged plastic phantom, as the echoes of his past scream in his perforated eardrum. He has just come from the wreckage of his stepmother's sanity, a woman who exists now only in the fractured ruins of terror and paranoia. He had stood there, a silent executioner, silencing her seizures with a sedative, watching the light die in her eyes as she clawed at him, weeping for a son lost in a basement of horrors. The filth of that encounter still clings to him like an invisible shroud, drawing him, like a moth to a dying flame, to Lee-yeon's room. He is not a predator here. He is a wounded animal seeking a place to collapse. He sinks onto the floor beside the rocking chair, his movements heavy, uncoordinated, and utterly devoid of the calculated lethality he displays in the daylight. He looks at the empty chair with eyes that see ghosts, his head bowed in a posture of defeat that is more terrifying than any threat. Lee-yeon watches him, the cold, defensive wall she has built beginning to crack under the weight of his unraveling. She sees the bruises on his lips, the scabbed remnants of his own violence, and feels that dangerous, corrosive pull of pity. It is a poison she is desperate to avoid, yet it seeps into her veins. She forces herself to articulate the chasm that lies between them. There is no misunderstanding to clear. There is only the wreckage of a truth that left his mother dead and their lives forever severed. She tells him this, her voice a thin thread of steel, trying to sever the tether he keeps trying to tie around her. She offers him a lifeline, a suggestion that he could choose a different existence, that he could walk away from the poison of his bloodline. But as she speaks, she realizes the tragedy. He is a man who doesn't know how to exist without the poison. He looks up at her, his eyes blurred, a drowning man desperate for a hand he knows he doesn't deserve. And in the silence that stretches between them, Lee-yeon realizes that by speaking the truth, she has only bound them closer to the tragedy they were both trying to escape. The silence between them is a physical weight, a dense, suffocating shroud that Lee-yeon tries to weave into a wall. She tells him to leave, to keep his hatred as a tether if he must, but to spare her the agonizing instability of his presence. She demands he let her go, offering him the one thing she thinks he needs, an enemy, a target for his suffocating obsession. But Kwon Chae-woo is past the point of targets. He is a man drowning in the very filth he helped create, and he has found his only lifeline in her refusal to be consumed by it. He is not merely mourning his own state, he is grieving the impossible distance between them. While he feels himself unraveling, buried in the literal and metaphorical debris of his family's depravity, Lee-yeon remains, to his eyes, a terrifying vision of stillness. Her lack of hate is not a mercy, it is the ultimate erasure. To be hated is to be seen, to be acknowledged as a force of destruction. To be met with her hollow, transparent gaze is to be rendered invisible. The atmosphere in the room changes, the temperature dropping until the air itself seems to crystallize. The mask of the nobleman and the predator dissolves, leaving behind something raw, primal, and deeply distorted. When he crawls onto the bed, trapping her beneath the weight of his own desperation, the scent of dried blood and iron fills the space. He is a beast that has been starved for an eternity, his hunger no longer about simple possession, but about a total, devastating collision of their realities. He offers her a dark, twisted covenant. He does not ask for her heart, nor her forgiveness. He offers himself as a permanent, suffocating fixture of her life, regardless of her loathing. He speaks of a lifetime built on the foundation of her disdain, a union forged in the fires of mutual destruction. When he moves, it is with the efficiency of a long-denied craving. He pins her arms, his movements calculated and forceful, overriding her reflexes with a dominance that borders on the divine. The kiss that follows is not a gesture of romance, it is an interrogation. He tastes her with the frantic, starving desperation of a man who has forgotten what it means to be nourished, his tongue an intruder that seeks to map every hidden corner of her resistance. The struggle is brief, a futile flicker against the bonfire of his resolve. When he pulls back, his face is a mask of pallor and exhaustion, his breathing ragged, a man who has just burned down his own house to feel the warmth of the flames. He asks the question again, the tremor in his voice betraying the cracking of his sanity. And as Lee-yeon stares up at him, her lips swollen, her breath hitching in the phantom wake of his assault, she realizes that the monster is not just at the door. He has taken up residence in the very center of her life. He whispers the final, chilling verdict, a reminder of the leash she has failed to hold, and in the dark, the beast waits for her next breath. The night is a fever dream, and Kwon Chae-woo is the architect of the delirium. His touch is not a caress, it is an intrusion, a cold, clinical mapping of territory that leaves Lee-yeon feeling exposed and raw. He moves with the unnerving precision of a creature testing the tensile strength of her resolve, his hand seeking purchase on her skin while his eyes remain fixed on her, calculating, searching for the crack in her composure. When she strikes him, an impulsive, frantic reflex, the sting of her palm against his cheek is met with nothing but a twisted, predatory amusement. He wears her fury like a crown, feeding on the very repulsion she offers, turning her hate into the oxygen for his obsession. The memory of the night lingers like the metallic scent of a storm. When she walks through the gardens the next day, the sunlight offers no solace. The encounter with a pair of German shepherds, their eyes dark and almond-shaped, serves as an eerie mirror to the events of the previous evening. As the trainer speaks of alpha dog syndrome, of creatures that, lacking the firm hand of a master, descend into a spiral of territorial aggression, biting the hands that feed them and guarding their space with a murderous, misplaced loyalty, the air around Lee-yeon seems to grow thin. She stands there, frozen, listening to the technical jargon of submission and dominance. The trainer describes a being that confuses intimacy with conflict, a creature whose attachment is a suffocating, lethal web. It is a portrait of a man, not a canine. The realization hits her with the force of a physical blow. Kwon Chae-woo is not looking for a partner. He is looking for a hierarchy, a structure to pin his chaotic, bleeding existence to. He is a beast that has forgotten how to be human, looking to her to either break him or be broken by him. The serenity she has cultivated in her garden, the delicate graftings and the quiet growth of her trees, is suddenly under siege. A report ripples through the staff, shattering the morning calm. The youngest master has returned, and he has brought a storm in his wake. They are donning their gear, their movements hurried and laden with the heavy metal of chainsaws and pruning tools. There is no ambiguity in the command, an order delivered with a chilling, detached finality. He is not just pruning the garden, he is annihilating it. As Lee-yeon stares at the workers preparing to raise the very life she has nurtured, she realizes the true nature of his ultimatum. He is clearing the ground, removing the obstacles, and burning the sanctuary that once kept him at bay. He is creating a void, a scorched earth canvas where there will be nothing left but the two of them. As the first engine roars to life, cutting through the silence of the trees, Lee-yeon knows the game has ended, and the hunt has begun in earnest. The indoor pool is a cathedral of shadows and silence, where the water, black, slick, and unnervingly thick, mimics the void of a sunless sea. Lee-yeon enters this hollow space, her heart a frantic percussion against her ribs, expecting a confrontation. Instead, she finds herself stepping into a nightmare disguised as luxury. As she reaches into the water, a chilling sensation of wrongness blooms against her skin. Before she can retreat, a phantom grip surges from the depths, dragging her into a world where the air is replaced by a heavy, clinging darkness. The surface breaks in a spray of frantic movement. Kwon Chae-woo emerges, a creature born of the pool's depths, his face a mask of primal, unfiltered rage. But he is not the hunter here, he is the barrier. In the water, the darkness comes alive. It is not just liquid, but a writhing colony. Creatures, primitive, jawless, and horrifying, detach from the shadows. They are nature's undertakers, prehistoric leeches with sucker mouths that bloom like diseased flowers, their circular maws lined with rows of razor-sharp, vestigial teeth. They are drawn to the scent of her vulnerability, their instinctual hunger focused on the single-minute scratch on her skin. The scene descends into a grotesque, visceral struggle. Kwon Chae-woo does not use a tool. He uses his hands, crushing the resilient, rubbery bodies of the lampreys with a ferocity that speaks of a deeper, darker madness. He is tearing them from her skin, his knuckles raw, his breathing a jagged, wet sound. The water swirls with the dark ghost of her blood, inciting the remaining swarm into a frenzy. When she is finally dragged onto the cold tiles, breathless and shivering, the reality of the environment settles in with a sickening finality. It is not a pool for leisure, but an aquarium for the damned, a holding tank for creatures that feast on the rot of dead things. He sits beside her, his body a map of wet, glistening muscle, his eyes hollowed out by the sheer, unbridled intensity of his protective instinct. He is vibrating with a terrifying desire to annihilate anything that dares to claim her, even if that something is merely a parasite of the dark. Lee-yeon is trembling, the image of those pomegranate-like maws etched into her retina, yet she clings to the one thing she came here to save. She pleads for the trees, for the garden, for the last remnants of the life she built. He ignores her pleas, his focus obsessively, pathologically fixed on the wounds left by the lampreys on her skin. He inspects her calf with the terrifying gentleness of a beast grooming its kill. He is not listening to her words. He is tasting the phantom blood of the creatures that touched her, his jaw aching with a phantom, predatory instinct. He is a man who would rather tear the world apart with his own teeth than allow a single parasite to graze the woman he refuses to let go. The garden's fate remains suspended in the air, a casualty of a war that is becoming increasingly indistinguishable from a feast. The boundary between the waking world and the fever's abyss has dissolved. Lee-yeon lies in the dark, her body a battlefield where burning heat and bone-deep tremors wage an endless war. The mansion, with its sterile grandeur, has become a suffocating cage, and the air around her feels thick, as if she is inhaling the very dust of the gardens she once tended. She is a woman adrift, her mind a tangled web of memories. The grotesque maws of the lampreys, the cold, calculating eyes of her employer, and the phantom weight of a life growing within her that demands a sanctuary she can no longer find. Driven by a desperate, delirious instinct, she reaches for the one connection that feels like reality. Her fingers fumble with the phone, the screen a blurred glow in the darkness. When the connection finally snaps into place, she doesn't think, she confesses. Her voice is a fragile, broken reed, spilling out secrets of hunger, of monsters in aquarium glass, and of a profound, gnawing alienation that has hollowed her out. She pours her fear into the line, unaware of the heavy, ragged breathing that begins to answer her on the other side. She is a ghost haunting her own life, whispering of a desire to simply be anywhere but here, anywhere but under the shadow of the Kwon name. The door to her room does not merely open, it yields. The air shifts, cooling instantly as a hand, deliberate, steady, and terrifyingly familiar, brushes against her burning brow. It is a touch that silences the tremor of her fever for a fleeting, agonizing second. She struggles to lift her eyelids, her vision a smear of watercolor shapes in the dim light. She expects salvation, perhaps a friend, but the silhouette hovering over her belongs to the storm itself. As the blanket is peeled away and her pajamas are raised, exposing the bandaged ruin of her ankles, she feels the cold air of the room bite into her skin. There is no gentleness in the way her legs are straightened, only a clinical, possessive focus. The gauze, soaked in the antiseptic memory of her injury, is stripped away with a precision that makes her gasp. She tries to focus, to pull the fragmented reality of the scene into view, but her mind is a sinking ship. She catches sight of two men standing in the threshold, the shadows of her entrapment looming over her as she lies exposed and vulnerable. She is a specimen pinned to the bed, a feverish, fading flower in a room that belongs to the wolves. In the haze of her delirium, she cannot tell if she is being rescued or if the final, cold cycle of her captivity has simply begun. The night is quiet, but the silence is heavy with the weight of things that are about to be broken. The room has shrunk to the size of a heartbeat, vibrating with the sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic and the suffocating weight of a truth that has finally breached the surface. The doctor's words, clinical, measured, and dripping with the cold prospect of mortality, have shattered the air. Sepsis. Death. Words that should be impossible in the presence of someone who occupies the entirety of Kwon Chae-woo's fractured existence. He had expected a battle, a physical wound to mend, but he is suddenly confronted by an existential terror. He stares at the syringe in the doctor's hand, his own shadow looming over Lee-yeon like a bird of prey. Lee-yeon, caught in the delirious loop of her own fever, fights the needle with a blind, panicked strength, her mind screaming a secret she cannot articulate, a life she is trying to protect even as her own body fails her. Then, chaos descends. Ju-baek, a small, fierce storm of intuition, launches himself into the fray. He is a child-shaped shield, snarling, biting, and chanting the names of the world's most venomous creatures as if they were holy, protective runes. He sees what the men in their arrogance have missed. He sees the fragile sanctity of the vessel. The doctor, sweating beneath the intensity of Chae-woo's gaze, offers the final, earth-shattering observation. A diagnosis that changes everything. Pregnancy. The word hangs in the room, heavy and absolute, freezing the very air. Kwon Chae-woo does not react with joy. He reacts with the slow, terrifying disintegration of a man who has built his entire life on the foundation of his own darkness. He looks at Lee-yeon, really looks at her, and finally understands the metamorphosis he had been too blind to witness. The subtle shifts, the changing scent, the bloom of health that he mistook for indifference. It was the quiet, miraculous growth of a life that was not his to claim, yet was inextricably linked to his own shadow. He presses his palm against the swell of her belly, and for the first time, his hand does not seek to dominate or possess. It trembles. The dam he had constructed to hold back his own chaotic nature begins to buckle under the pressure of this new, terrifying reality. He realizes, with a sickening, visceral clarity, that while she had been moving toward a horizon where he did not exist, He has been tethered to her all along, a satellite lost in the gravity of a star he had tried to extinguish. He feels the scales of his life tilt, the weight of his past actions pulling him down into an abyss of his own making. He had wanted to erase his past, to purge himself of his own lineage, but he has instead etched his survival into the very creature who now carries the future. The realization is a profound, searing pain, a realization that he has become the architect of his own exclusion. She was becoming something whole, something resilient, while he was only becoming more desperately, pathologically bound to the woman who now held everything he would never possess. In the silence that follows, as the fever begins to break and the gravity of the secret settles into the room, he leans into her, not as a hunter, but as a man watching his only exit vanish in the dawn. There is no going back. The fall has already begun. The morning light filters into the room like a soft, intrusive promise, washing away the fever-induced terrors of the previous night. Lee-yeon stirs, her mind floating in the hazy residue of half-remembered sensations, the ghost of a cool cloth on her brow, the rhythmic, grounding presence of someone who refused to let go, and the phantom weight of a protective embrace. When she awakens, the room is quiet, but the air is thick with a lingering, sharp scent of cedar and old blood, a signature she now recognizes as clearly as her own pulse. Kwon Chae-woo enters, his movements stripped of the predatory intensity that usually defined him. He is domestic, almost painfully so, moving through the space with the tentative grace of a beast learning to walk on two legs. His eyes, usually mirrors of a frozen, bottomless dark, are clouded with a frantic, unvoiced ache as he hovers near the bed. He watches her with an hunger that has nothing to do with sustenance and everything to do with the survival of his own soul. He knows what she carries, though the words remain an unspooled thread between them. The kitchen becomes their surreal battleground. He cooks with a focused, desperate precision, his hands trembling behind his back, his body masked against the sudden, violent waves of nausea that strike him in sympathy with her changing state. He is a man performing the rituals of a husband, a role he once would have discarded as a weakness, now clinging to it as the only anchor in his drowning world. Lee-yeon, fueled by a hunger that feels both unnatural and profound, eats with a voraciousness that surprises even her. The flavors are a haunting echo of a life she thought she had lost, a taste of the Hwaido she once called home. Every bite is a bridge back to a simplicity she no longer possesses, crafted by the very man who turned her world into a cage. She is sharp, dismissive, and fiercely alive, shoving him aside when his own body betrays him, oblivious to the fact that she is the reason his world is currently burning. He watches her eat, a silent, starving witness. He has come to a devastating conclusion. He will follow her blindly, a loyal, if broken, hound returning to the only hand that ever held him, even if that hand eventually destroys him. The weight of his family's blood-soaked legacy, the ghost of Yoon Joo-ha, and the violence that paved his path, all of it is being pushed aside for the sake of the life she shields. He is no longer looking for vengeance. He is looking for a way to endure the silence of her absence. The breakfast is interrupted by the arrival of a spectre, an old butler, stiff and colorless as a tombstone. The intrusion is jarring, a reminder that the sanctuary of the kitchen is an illusion. The summons is cold, formal, and inevitable. As Lee-yeon stands before the heavy, mahogany doors of Kwon Chae-wook's study, the warmth of the meal curdles into a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She is no longer just a gardener. She is a vessel, a target, and a witness. The voice from within the room, thin and cutting, commands her entry. She reaches for the handle, her breath hitching, knowing that the fragile, domestic peace of the morning is about to be shattered against the jagged reality of the Kwon estate. She pushes the door open, stepping out of the light and into the calculated darkness of the study, where the true price of her hunger is waiting to be collected. The study is a sanctuary of suffocating wood and unspoken threats, where the air clings to the skin like damp velvet. Kwon Chae-wook sits behind his desk, a man carved from polished stone and cold calculation. When he speaks, it is with the measured precision of a blade being drawn from a sheath. The mention of the Hwaido project, a landscape of bittersweet achievement, serves only as a mask for the true intent of the encounter. He frames her as an invited partner, a professional honor that rings with the hollow, terrifying resonance of a trap. Lee-yeon's refusal is already forming on her lips, but it dies there as his hand, cool, deliberate, and invasive, presses against the gentle swell of her belly. The gesture is a chilling violation, a silent declaration that the sanctuary she thought she occupied in the shadows has been breached by an omniscient observer. The world inside her, the secret she has nurtured like a dying flame, is no longer hers alone. He knows. He has been watching from the periphery, collecting evidence of her existence, documenting her private transitions with the chilling detachment of a man surveying a garden he intends to burn or harvest. The room tilts. The floor beneath her feet feels like water, and the oxygen in the room thins to the point of agony. She is a bird caught in the talons of a predator who doesn't even need to close his hand to crush her. Then, the door yields. Kwon Chae-woo stands in the threshold, his silhouette framed by the sharp, unforgiving light of the hallway. He watches the scene, the intimate proximity, the tactile intrusion, the sight of Lee-yeon's hand clutching the man who has just laid claim to her most precious secret. He is the storm that has been contained, his features carved into a mask of restrained, vibrating violence. With a movement that is both possessive and desperate, he tears them apart, physically manifesting his own crumbling sanity as he drags Lee-yeon from the room. The corridor is a long, echo-filled tunnel where the silence is broken only by the ragged, synchronized gasps of their breathing. He stops, his grip on her wrist turning from a lifeline into a shackle, then back again into a frantic, apologetic caress. The man who moments ago was a titan of cold resolve is now dissolving before her eyes. He hangs his head, his posture broken, his voice a jagged splinter of confession. He is no longer the hunter, no longer the jailer. He is a man who has looked into the abyss of his own future and found that it contains nothing but his own undoing. His eyes, webbed with a red rupture of burst capillaries, reflect a terrifying, infantile vulnerability. He offers her the only currency he has left, his own absolute, unconditional surrender. He pleads for a connection, for a touch, for a scrap of warmth to bandage the wounds of his own making. He is willing to be her growth, her servant, her perpetual deception, if only she will reach out and hold him together. As he looks at her, begging for a consolation he has no right to demand, the line between her victim and her savior blurs into something dangerous and unrecognizable. The power has shifted, and in the quiet of the hall, Lee-yeon realizes that the man who wanted to rule her life is now begging to be the one thing she can finally cast away, or, perhaps, the one thing she is now irrevocably destined to keep. The corridor is no longer a path, it is a gallows. Kwon Chae-woo stands before Lee-yeon, a man stripped of his armor, his arrogance, and the cold, impenetrable mask of his station. The man who once commanded with a glance is now reduced to a trembling supplicant, his hands reaching for her as if he is trying to catch smoke. He speaks of a fractured past, of the terror he felt when his own body betrayed his mind, drawn to her scent and her warmth when his memories were nothing but a void. He confesses to the petty, desperate jealousy he felt toward his own former self, admitting that he fought to maintain his hatred only because he was terrified of what would remain if he let it go. He is trying to bridge the gap with the fragments of his shattered soul, pleading for understanding, for a chance to rewrite the history of their cruelty. But Lee-yeon has already finished the final chapter of their story. She stares at him, her gaze as hollow and unforgiving as the earth she once shoveled. She delivers the blow not with a scream, but with a flat, lethal calm. She speaks of a funeral, of the weight of black fabric, and of the cold reality of a grave she has already filled. To her, he is not a man seeking redemption. He is a spectre she has already committed to the dark. The man he was, the husband she endured, the shadow that haunted her home, she has buried them all. The silence that follows is absolute. Kwon Chae-woo recoils as if struck by a physical force, his expression freezing into a mask of hollow shock. He is a man who spent his life learning how to dismantle the world around him, only to find he has no idea how to exist in the ruins of the one he cherished. He offers everything, his wealth, his labor, his very breath, a desperate bargain struck with a woman who has already learned that his presence is more fatal than his absence. He clings to her clothing, a desperate, pathetic anchor, but Lee-yeon remains unmoved, her silence a wall of sharpened glass. She holds a mirror up to his own poison, casting his past lies and the heavy shadow of his mother's death back into his face. She is testing him, or perhaps she is simply waiting for him to finally collapse under the weight of his own monstrous history. The air between them is heavy, charged with the static of a final, irrevocable departure. As she questions his capacity for belief, as she flings the possibility of her own deceit into the light, he realizes that he is trapped. He is a ghost trying to convince the living of his existence, but the tomb is sealed. And as she turns away, refusing to acknowledge the wreckage at her feet, the man who wanted to rule her heart is left with the agonizing, silent realization that he has finally, truly, become a stranger in her world. The air in the hallway is heavy, charged with the static of a storm that refuses to break. Lee-yeon stands as the architect of her own cold defiance, her words sharp enough to draw blood. She mocks his vulnerability, weaponizing her own dishonesty against him, testing to see how much of his pride she can strip away before the beast underneath finally snaps. But Kwon Chae-woo has moved beyond the arrogance of his station. He offers himself up as a vessel for her sins, a man so starved for the ghost of their connection that he would swallow her darkest secrets just to remain in her orbit. It is a grotesque, desperate dance. He reaches for her, his touch a phantom weight that causes her to recoil, her instinct screaming a warning that her mind tries to suppress. To her, he is not a man, he is a recurring nightmare she thought she had outrun. She flees, her footsteps thundering against the polished floor, the sunlight outside feeling like an unreachable dream as she plunges into the gloom of the estate's interior. The pursuit is instantaneous. He catches her with the force of a falling wall, his arms locking around her with a strength that ignores her protests. His pleas are dissonant melody, half tender, half menacing, as he buries his face in the crook of her neck. He is a man begging for mercy while holding the knife to his own throat. He speaks of waiting, of eternity, of a devotion that borders on the divine and the demonic. It is the chilling realization that for all his performance of obedience, the predator has not vanished. He has simply learned to mask his hunger as servitude. Lee-yeon shifts the battlefield. She demands distance. She commands silence. And, with a terrifying precision, she demands he stop chasing. He freezes, chained by her words, as the call comes through, a jagged interruption that slices through the tension. The revelation from the other end of the line lands with the force of a physical blow. The truth about the past, about her innocence in the shadows of his family's corruption, cascades over him. The reward she refused. The medical bills she never claimed. The complexity of her character is not a puzzle he can solve, but a mirror that reveals his own monstrous myopia. He stands paralyzed, the phone clutched in a trembling hand, his own breath coming in ragged, painful hitches. The reality of her integrity, contrasted with the rot of his own suspicions, turns his stomach. He has spent these past 10 days trying to piece together a reality that had already moved on without him. The realization burns behind his eyes, a searing, toxic mixture of regret and sickening clarity. He looks at her, the woman he tried to bury, the woman he thought he understood, and realizes that while he was busy playing the role of a vengeful husband, she had been quietly building a life that had no room for him. He is left in the hallway, a man holding a truth he can no longer bear to possess, watching as the only woman who ever mattered becomes a stranger to him, bit by agonizing bit. The foundation of his world hasn't just cracked, it has turned to dust, and in the silence, he finally hears the sound of his own undoing. The garden is a ruin of overturned earth and splintered petals, a jagged reflection of the chaos currently unraveling behind the mansion's walls. Lee-yeon moves through the grounds, her breath hitching in the thick, humid air, seeking the anonymity of the staff and the safety of the mundane. She watches as the guard team wrestles with restless, muzzled animals, creatures driven to destructive madness by the same environment that is currently strangling her. The trainer's advice cuts through the noise, a clinical, detached instruction on dominance, patience, and the necessity of boundaries. He speaks of training dogs, but the subtext lands with the weight of a funeral shroud. Ignore the whining. Be persistent. Reward the good, starve the bad. Lee-yeon realizes she has been building these very walls around her own heart, trying to train a man who refuses to be anything but a wild, encroaching shadow. In the dim, pulsing arteries of the mansion, Kwon Chae-woo stalks the corridors like a fever dream. The light fixtures overhead stutter, drowning the hallway in rhythmic pulses of artificial glare and oppressive shadow. Every time the light dips, his face is revealed, a portrait of a man coming undone, his features pulled taut by a hunger that has no name. He is wandering the dark, navigating the musty scent of neglect and rot, haunted by the two rules that define his current, agonizing purgatory. He moves with a dangerous, quiet purpose. His mind, once a citadel of cold strategy, is now a labyrinth of erratic impulses. He weighs the impossible, to kidnap, to isolate, to possess, or to bow. He is wrestling with the violent heritage of his own bloodline, terrified that if he stops to think, he will simply become another iteration of the monsters that built this estate. He is a man who knows only how to destroy, frantically trying to learn the art of being gentle. The contrast is absolute. Outside, the garden is being prepared for a gala of the elite, a hollow charade hosted by names that carry the weight of empires. Inside, the foundation of the Kwon legacy is beginning to crack under the pressure of a single, broadcasted crime. A man beaten in a club, a digital trail of corruption, a public outcry that threatens to dismantle the very pillars of his house, it is all converging. He stands in the dark, mask pushed down, his eyes burning with the strain of holding back the tide. He is looking for something, a record, a secret, a weapon, that will allow him to bridge the gap to Lee-yeon without triggering her flight. He is a man caught between the instinct to hunt and the desperation to be needed. And as the news of the scandal filters through the halls, he realizes the world outside is turning against his family. The danger is no longer just in the bedroom or the garden. It is at the gate. And for a man who has already decided to die waiting for her, the collapse of his family's empire might just be the opening he needs to drag her into the final, inescapable quiet. The air in the room is stale, heavy with the metallic tang of dried blood and the suffocating scent of secrets. Kwon Chae-woo stands over the shackled form of a man who serves as the fuse for a bomb that could incinerate the entire Kwon Empire. But the man on the floor is not a stranger. He is Kwon Lee-yeon, a brother cast from the same darkness but carved into a different shape. The brother, an elementary school teacher by day and a ghost in the machine by night, smiles through the wreckage of his bruised face, his eyes flashing with the cold, familiar intelligence of someone who has spent years dissecting the family legacy from the outside in. The conversation is a sharp, jagged exchange of dangerous truths. Lee-yeon, the black hat hacker who bleeds the family accounts dry one digit at a time, watches his youngest brother with a mixture of pity and professional disdain. He speaks of the patriarch's new, desperate alliances, hired killers from across the borders brought in to guard a throne that is already rotting. He warns Chae-woo that the patriarch is playing a game where the only prize for a loyal dog is an unmarked grave. Chae-woo remains unmoved, his own darkness vibrating in the quiet. He doesn't want safety, and he certainly doesn't want the family's approval. He is waiting for a different kind of liberation, tethered to the house not by blood, but by a hostage he is terrified to lose. The admission hangs in the air, a confession that the unstoppable, terrifying force of the Kwon lineage has finally found its anchor in something as soft and fragile as a single, traumatized woman. Lee-yeon, whose soul was forged in the empathy he learned from witnessing the family's cruelty, understands the weight of that confession instantly. He has spent his life trying to shield the innocent from the machinery of his family's violence, and he recognizes the look in Chae-woo's eyes, the frantic, unhinged devotion of a man who has traded his life for a heartbeat that is not his own. The air turns cold as the talk shifts to the upcoming gala, a masquerade of wealth and power held in the mansion's very own garden. It is a stage where the elite will preen, oblivious to the fact that they are walking into a theater of war. Lee-yeon offers a jagged path to vengeance, a way to tear down the patriarch's walls while the world is distracted by the glitter of charity and politics. He offers a warning wrapped in a strawberry-sweet smile: if there is anything, or anyone, that Chae-woo values within those walls, it must be removed before the roof is brought down. Chae-woo nods, his face a frozen landscape of anticipation. He knows the game. He knows that by the time the event ends, the garden, and perhaps the entire house, will be unrecognizable. The predator has decided to burn the forest to save the prey, and as the brothers stand in the shadow of their dying family, the scent of smoke begins to drift through the hallways. The countdown to the gala is not just a schedule, it is the ticking of a clock that will mark the end of everything they once knew. The moon casts long, skeletal shadows across the manor floor, turning the hallway into a silent stage for a tragedy of errors. Lee-yeon finds him there, a discarded, broken thing slumped against the threshold of her sanctuary. Kwon Chae-woo does not look like the predator who haunts her waking life. He looks like a man who has finally been hollowed out by his own desperate pursuit. His clothes carry the copper tang of fresh violence, a sensory ghost of whatever hell he has been traversing in the dark. He is unnervingly still, his skin the color of marble left too long in the winter, his presence an ache that resonates against the doorframe. She does not flinch. She has moved past the point of fear into a cold, clinical detachment that serves as her only armor. When she kicks his thigh, it is not with malice, but with the weary impatience of someone nudging a piece of debris out of her path. But when those pale, sharp irises lock onto her, the air between them thickens, heavy with the swampy, suffocating scent of his exhaustion. He is starving, but not for food. He is a man who has weaponized his own physical existence against himself, refusing the reprieve of sleep because the visions it brings are fate worse than the exhaustion currently tearing him apart. He confesses his frailty, his obsession, in a voice that sounds like wet earth sliding into a grave. Lee-yeon watches him with a mixture of revulsion and a dark, intoxicating sense of dominion. She prods him, her words like a surgeon's needle probing a wound. She mocks his inability to find solace in another, framing his obsession as a pathetic failure of character. She watches his hands tremble, that raw, visceral tremor of a man denied his only anchor, and feels the terrifying thrill of power pulse through her own veins. She has become the center of his solar system, the gravity that keeps him from drifting into the void of his own madness. He does not defend himself. He only leans further into her orbit, his words a desperate, jagged plea for degradation. He wants to be broken by her. He wants to be the rag she wrings dry, a tool of her own construction, surrendered entirely to the cruelty he has earned. She looks down at him, this monster who has become a supplicant, and realizes that the power dynamic has shifted from a hunt into a suicide pact. He is inviting her to destroy him, to strip him of his pride, his agency, and his remaining sanity, if only she will acknowledge that he is hers. He presses his forehead against the floor, a soundless, shuddering collapse of the man who once thought he could conquer the world. He is a rag, yes, but one that is soaking up the very essence of her resentment. As she looks down at his bowed head, she realizes that by refusing him, she is only driving the needle deeper. He isn't just looking for sleep, he is looking for an end, and he has decided that only she has the authority to grant it. She stands above him, the silent arbiter of his ruin, as the house around them groans under the weight of the secrets about to burst through its walls. He is waiting for a command, a touch, a curse, anything to keep him from drifting away. And in that moment of absolute, toxic vulnerability, the boundary between the victim and the master vanishes entirely, leaving only the shadow of what is to come. The hallway has become a tomb of his own making, where Kwon Chae-woo waits like a sentinel cast in shadow. His plea is not an assault, it is a surrender. He offers his own dismemberment, a dark, grotesque metaphor for his devotion, asking only to be pruned like the very flora Lee-yeon tends. When her hand, unguarded and traitorous, brushes against his hair, the world stops. It is a spark in a room filled with gasoline, an act of humanity that shatters the fragile cage he has built around his own impulses. The tension shifts, darkening, as he centers his fixation on the life she conceals. He is no longer asking for forgiveness, he is claiming ownership of the secret growing within her. His claim is blunt, clinical, and chillingly possessive. It is a statement that silences the room, turning the air into something too thick to breathe. He does not touch her, not really, but the intent behind his words is a physical weight, pressing against her skin with the intensity of a brand. She retreats into the sanctuary of her room, slamming the door against the ghost of his presence. But the silence is a lie. Every night, the sound of his collapse outside her door, a dull, rhythmic thud that signals his exhaustion, becomes the new, maddening heartbeat of her home. She is trapped in a domestic purgatory, haunted by a man who has decided that if he cannot be her master, he will be her shadow, her guard dog, and her greatest fear, all at once. The rumor mill of the estate hums with the whispers of the servants. The young master has a new, erratic devotion to the cold stone of the hallway floors. Lee-yeon, worn thin by the atmospheric pressure of his proximity, tries to bury herself in the mundane labor of the upcoming gala. She prunes and prepares, desperately seeking a distraction from the way his voice, once familiar, now ignites a forbidden, shameful heat beneath her skin. But the reprieve is an illusion. As she prepares to leave the grounds, the machinery of the Kwon estate finally catches up to her. A suit, polished and devoid of empathy, blocks her path. It is a summons from the center of the labyrinth, a command from the director himself. She follows, her hands instinctively shielding her stomach, her internal compass spinning as she realizes the trajectory is leading her straight into the heart of the beast. She is being guided toward the private quarters, toward the epicenter of the Kwon family's madness. As they cross the threshold of a sterile, imposing building, the escort stops. The air grows cold, and the apology that leaves his lips is not one of remorse, but of finality, the kind of soft, dangerous whisper that precedes a trap snapping shut. The path forward has vanished. Lee-yeon realizes, with a sickening jolt, that she has not been summoned to an office, but to an altar. And the man waiting inside is not the husband who begged for her mercy, but the one who intends to collect his due. The invitation to the private quarters is not a summons of authority, it is an act of desperation. Jang Beam-hee, the ever-watchful gatekeeper of the Kwon estate, drops the cold mask of the employee for a moment, revealing the fraying edges of a man who has reached his limit. The secret is out. The man who haunts the hallways is not just fueled by obsession, but by a chemical reliance on neural stimulants to mask the agony of his own shattered nerves. Lee-yeon's own hand, the one she thought was offering mercy by swapping his medication, has only deepened the crisis. Inside the room, the scene is stripped of all warmth. Kwon Chae-woo lies in a state of unnatural dormancy, his body a discarded vessel. Beside him waits a mirror, a woman crafted to mimic Lee-yeon in height, build, and features. It is a grotesque theater of substitution, a hollow replica designed to pacify a predator who can no longer distinguish between the reality he craves and the illusion he is forced to accept. Jang Beom-hee's plea is a cold, calculated calculus: help us, or suffer the consequences of his obsession forever. Lee-yeon feels the walls closing in. She is being asked to participate in her own displacement, to hand over the skin she wears and the habits she has cultivated to a woman who will, in the dark, become her. The absurdity of it is almost laughable, a dark humor that sticks in the throat. She is not being asked to leave. She is being asked to curate the perfect forgery of her own existence to facilitate the rest of a man who has made her his entire world. The woman tasked with the deception is a professional, a void waiting to be filled. She mimics Lee-yeon's scent, her hairstyle, even the subtle cadence of her breath. As the decoy begins to move, kneeling toward the bed with the practiced grace of a predator closing in on its prey, the room becomes a vacuum of tension. Lee-yeon stands frozen, watching the imitation of her own life unfold. She is paralyzed by the sight, a spectator to her own obsolescence. The decoy slips her arm into Kwon Chae-woo's, a familiar, intimate motion that should have been Lee-yeon's, but isn't. The air is stagnant, heavy with the weight of what is about to happen. Jang Beom-hee monitors the bed with the predatory focus of a hawk, while Lee-yeon's own heart beats a frantic, erratic rhythm against her ribs. The man on the bed is the most dangerous variable in the room. His senses, honed to razor-sharp precision by a lifetime of training as a hunter, are currently dormant, but the question hangs in the suffocating silence. What happens when the beast wakes and finds that the scent in his arms is not the one he has been starving for? The masquerade has begun, and as the woman leans closer to the sleeping man, the line between performance and reality begins to blur into a terrifying, irreversible horizon. The room is a theater of shadows and deceit, and Lee-yeon is forced to watch a performance she never asked to see. Before her, a stranger in her own skin, a woman draped in the stolen identity of Lee-yeon's own habits and scent, reaches for the man who has turned his life into a cage. When Kwon Chae-woo pulls this mimic close, the air in the room turns frigid. It is a moment of haunting recognition. The way his arms coil around her waist is a reflex born of muscle memory and starvation. To Lee-yeon, it is not merely a sight, it is a physical violation, an intrusion into the private, jagged history they share. But the predator does not sleep as soundly as they hoped. The quiet is shattered by a violent, jagged erupting of malice. Kwon Chae-woo, dragged back from the edge of oblivion by an instinct that transcends even the heavy fog of his sedatives, turns on the imposter with lethal precision. He is no longer a man in a dream. He is a cornered animal, his movements fluid, brutal, and terrifying. The room dissolves into chaos. The mimic, a professional in the art of simulation, is reduced to a shivering, broken thing beneath his hands. His voice, stripped of all coherence, becomes a guttural demand for the truth. He knows the scent is a lie. He knows the skin is a counterfeit. The tragedy of the moment is as sharp as the terror. He is not a man who has found a new source of comfort. He is a man who has realized that his soul has been so completely colonized by Lee-yeon that he can no longer distinguish the genuine from the ghost. When Lee-yeon steps into the fray, the violence stops as if hit by an invisible wall. She is the only tether left in his shattered mind. He collapses against her, his body trembling with the pathetic, raw tremors of a man who believes he has been violated by an imitation. He clings to her neck, his breath hitched in rhythmic, broken sobs, convinced that his own body was betrayed by the smell of her on the stranger. Lee-yeon looks at Jang Beom-hee, her eyes burning with a silent, blistering fury that demands an explanation for the poison masquerading as medicine. The room is cleared, the servants and the mimic cast out into the hallway, leaving only the two of them in the stifling, blood-scented dark. She holds him, or perhaps he holds her, in a deadlock of mutual destruction. He is murmuring into her skin, his words a desperate, incoherent litany of self-pity and fear, convinced that he is the victim of a grand, cosmic assault. But in the dim light, amidst the wreckage of the attempted seduction and the sharp, medicinal stench of the room, something crucial is missed. He shudders against her, his voice cracking with a sorrow that seems to touch the very core of his being. And yet, beneath the tremor of his lips and the frantic pace of his breathing, his eyes remain a startling, chilling void. They are perfectly, terrifyingly dry. As Lee-yeon stares into the dark, the realization dawns. The hunter has not just woken up. He has been playing the game all along, and he has successfully drawn her exactly where he wanted her, back into the circle of his arms. The trap hasn't just snapped shut, it has locked from the inside. The air in the room is suffocating, thick with the scent of unspent desire and the sharp, metallic tang of the medicine Jang Beom-hee poured into the dark. Kwon Chae-woo, the man who once commanded shadows and dismantled empires, is now a creature unraveled, his dignity stripped away by a hunger that has no vocabulary but touch. He is a fever made flesh, radiating a heat that makes the very walls feel like they are closing in, yet he remains tethered to the restrictive, arbitrary rules Lee-yeon has placed upon him. He is a beast in a gilded cage of her design. Every movement he makes toward her is an exercise in agonizing restraint. He is hard, desperate, and trembling, a coiled spring of masculine frustration that threatens to snap at any second. Lee-yeon watches him with a mixture of revulsion and a treacherous, budding curiosity. She is the tamer, armed with the cold, detached wisdom of the animal trainer. Ignore the unwanted, reward the small, maintain the boundary. But the animal is learning how to manipulate the tamer. He uses his own degradation as a weapon. He openly mocks his own loss of pride, weaponizing his shameless need to make her heart race. He challenges her, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that bypasses her intellect and strikes directly at her nerves. He is not asking for her love, he is demanding an acknowledgement of the chemical, undeniable gravity between them. Then, she gives in, offering a small, calculated concession, the permission to scent her. It is meant to be a tether, a way to keep him grounded, but it acts instead like a match dropped into a cavern of dry brush. The transformation is instantaneous. The man who was pathetically pleading a moment ago vanishes, replaced by a predator who has been given the one thing he was starving for. His lunge is absolute. The sound of his mouth against her ear, the wet, sticky drag of his tongue, the deliberate, agonizing precision with which he maps her skin, is a sensory assault that shatters her composure. Her resolve, carefully constructed over days of icy distance, dissolves under the pressure of his invasive warmth. He isn't just kissing her, he is dismantling her defenses one layer at a time, his breath a humid storm that floods her senses. When he moves to claim her lips, it is not a romantic gesture. It is an act of reclamation. It is aggressive, hungry, and deeply, uncontrollably intimate. The friction of his tongue against hers is a wildfire, and for the first time, Lee-yeon stops fighting the blaze. She is sinking, her mind turning to liquid, the memory of her own rules evaporating as he pins her between the reality of her resistance and the sheer, overwhelming power of his obsession. The last shred of her detachment is consumed by the rhythm of his breathing, the flex of his muscles against hers, and the dark, inevitable certainty that she has not tamed him at all. She has only invited the beast to feast. The door is locked, the room is quiet, and as the kiss deepens into something darker and more voracious, the final question remains. When he finally buries his face in her, will there be anything left of Lee-yeon to save? The room has become an arena where the currency is not gold or power, but the raw, unadulterated friction of skin against skin. The air is thick with the scent of labored breath and the metallic, heady perfume of a predator finally being brought to heel. Lee-yeon finds herself at the center of a psychological tempest, her senses besieged by the sight of Kwon Chae-woo, a man who once viewed the world as something to be conquered, now reduced to a trembling supplicant, begging for the simplest of mercies. His kiss is a brutal map of his obsession, an invasive, hungry exploration that leaves her breathless and reeling. He is a man intoxicated by his own desperation, his tongue and teeth marking her with the intensity of a vow. Yet, even in the height of his fever, he remains shackled to the new, ironclad rules of her making. She holds the leash, and with every flicker of his eyes, she confirms that the beast is not just tamed, he is addicted to the cruelty of her control. The scene that follows is a masterclass in psychological disintegration. She forces him into a display of absolute surrender, commanding him to pleasure himself under her unrelenting gaze, only to snatch the reprieve away at the precipice of his release. Each time she whispers stop, she is not just halting his physical rhythm, she is shattering his composure, observing with a dark, detached satisfaction as the veins in his neck bulge and his composure splinters. He is a man suffering in the most exquisite way imaginable. His face, usually a mask of ice or rage, is now a contorted map of resentment, shame, and blinding, involuntary excitement. He obeys her commands with a frantic, stuttering obedience, his hands working against his own body at her whim. When she finally permits him the release he has been denied, it is not a victory for him, it is a submission to the hunger she has cultivated. As he collapses, flushed and broken, he offers apologies and promises of restraint that feel as fragile as glass. He is a man undone, licking his lips with eyes that remain fixed on her, shimmering with a mix of adoration and profound, terrifying resentment. Lee-yeon watches him, the absolute master of his misery. She has turned the hunter into a pet, and the silence that settles over the room after his climax is not one of peace, but of anticipation. She has tasted the intoxicating power of making a monster yield, and as he kneels before her, shivering and ruined, she realizes that the discipline has only just begun. But beneath the surface of her cold victory, the shadows in the room seem to stretch. Outside, the mansion groans, the foundation of the Kwon legacy continuing its slow, inevitable slide into ruin. Inside, Lee-yeon has secured her hold on the most dangerous element in the house, but as he looks up at her with those moisture-bright eyes, she feels a sudden, sharp tremor of dread. He is behaving. He is resisting. He is broken. But as he settles into the quiet, a flicker of something deeply inhuman passes through his gaze, a signal that even in his total surrender, he is still the one waiting to see what she will do next when the lights go out. The morning light filters through the blinds, painting the room in stripes of pale gold and shadow. Beside Lee-yeon, the man who only hours ago was a frantic, broken thing, a desperate creature begging for the scraps of her attention, now lies in a state of unsettling tranquility. His eyes are clear, the dull, drug-induced haze vanished like mist under the sun. He watches her with a predatory stillness that makes the hair on her arms stand on end. He is revived, reassembled, and entirely too satisfied. He holds her wrist, a grip that is part caress and part shackle. The marks of her own nails are still etched into her skin, red crescents that serve as a visceral reminder of the power dynamic that shifted in the dark. He does not speak of the humiliation, the forced obedience, or the way she dismantled his composure piece by piece. He speaks only of the hunt. To him, the struggle was not a trial, it was a game. A game he clearly intends to play again. As she moves through the world outside that bedroom, the mundane reality of the estate feels thin, like a veil ready to tear. She carries with her a lunchbox, a domestic peace offering that tastes of guilt and complication. It is a meticulously crafted meal, prepared by hands that were, just the night before, desperate to do violence. The food is warm, the flavors refined, but with every bite, she feels the weight of his gaze. It is a lonely, haunting look, the face of the husband she once knew, overlaid with the sharp, unrecognizable features of the man he has become. But the sanctuary of her routine is fraying. A colleague, once a stranger, now hovers, his sudden interest in her lunchbox feeling like an intrusive probe into a life he has no right to touch. His presence is a distraction, a discordant note in the symphony of her psychological confinement. She eats in silence, her mind constantly drifting back to the man who promised to dig her up from the grave if she ever tried to leave. Outside, the air is heavy with the scent of lilies and damp earth as the estate prepares for the charity auction. The garden is being transformed into a theater for the elite, a place of forced smiles and expensive vanity. Gardeners scurry about like ants, blind to the fact that they are building a stage for a tragedy. Lee-yeon watches them, her pulse sluggish, her thoughts returning to the man who has managed to weave himself into the very fabric of her sanity. She is trapped between the desire to scrub her life clean of his influence and the terrifying reality that she has become his anchor. Every flower she arranged, every task she completed, now feels like a countdown to an inevitable collapse. As the scent of the autumn blooms drifts through the open window, it mixes with the phantom smell of his skin, a cold, sharp, and inescapable scent. The auction will bring the world to their doorstep, and as the clock ticks, she wonders if she is watching a garden being prepared for a gala, or a grave being dug for the person she used to be. The garden is a canvas of deceptive serenity, where the scent of blooming lilies masks the copper tang of impending violence. Beneath the manicured hedges and the laughter of the elite, the machinery of death is being calibrated with clinical precision. A man with dirt-stained fingers and cold eyes assembles a legacy of ruin, his sniper rifle clicking into place like the heartbeat of a predator. He is a ghost who has spent years pruning the Kwon family's roses, waiting for the singular, lethal moment to turn their own sanctuary into a slaughterhouse. For him, the charity auction is nothing more than a stage, and the high society guests are simply targets waiting to be harvested. In the midst of this invisible storm, Lee-yeon stands as a fragile centerpiece. She is oblivious to the cold steel barrel tracking the crowd, her world narrowed down to the shifting moods of the man who has claimed her life as his territory. When Kwon Chae-woo appears, he is a jarring contrast to the gardener's hidden malice. He looms in the window, a suit-clad apparition framed by sunlight, his presence turning the air heavy and stagnant. There is no trace of the broken, pleading supplicant from the night before. His demeanor is dangerously indifferent, his words an ultimatum delivered with the casual air of a king issuing a decree. He demands her total enclosure, his eyes scanning her with an intensity that feels like a brand. He speaks of noise, a cryptic, chilling warning that cuts through the facade of the gala preparations. Lee-yeon, long ago hardened to the casual cruelties and bizarre architectures of the Kwon estate, recognizes the shift in the atmosphere. She knows that when he speaks of noise, he means blood. Her survival has become a game of quiet compliance, a desperate effort to stay in the shadows of a house that thrives on darkness. As he reaches out to brush a stray speck from her lips, the motion is jarring, a flicker of an intimacy that feels entirely alien in the face of his cold, new vigilance. He leaves behind a handful of fallen petals, pressed into her palm like a perverse, fragile gift. But as he turns away, the wind catches them. The petals tumble from her fingers, catching the light as they drift toward the soil. To anyone else, it is a simple gust of autumn air. To Lee-yeon, as she watches them hit the ground, they look like fresh, wet droplets of crimson. The scene is set. The sniper has his aim, the master has his prisoner, and the garden is preparing to drink its fill. Lee-yeon stands with empty hands, watching the red smudges on the earth, realization dawning that she is not just a witness to the carnage to come, but the very prize the shadows are competing to collect. The air, previously heavy with the scent of lilies and the pretension of the elite, curdled into something metallic and sharp. Lee-yeon's quiet act of mercy, guiding a distressed, elegant stranger to safety, becomes the silent witness to a nightmare. She had navigated the promenade with the mundane concern of a woman who just wanted to reach her friend, only to have the tranquil, sun-drenched garden shattered by a sound that defies the natural order of a gala. It starts not with a roar, but with a single, sickening crack. The woman Lee-yeon had helped, the laughter of the guests, the poise of the servers, all of it is erased in a heartbeat. A woman falls, the light in her eyes extinguished before she can even register the violation of her own skin. Then comes the rhythm of slaughter. The garden, a curated masterpiece of nature, transforms into a slaughterhouse. Bullets tear through the fabric of the event, turning crystal glassware into shrapnel and white tablecloths into canvases of deep, spreading red. The elegant facade of the charity auction is ripped away, revealing the rot underneath. It was never a sanctuary for art, but a stage for a power struggle that has finally turned its weapons on its own architects. Lee-yeon stands on the precipice, the world around her tilting on its axis. Every sound is magnified, the frantic barking of dogs, the discordant symphony of shattered glass, and the guttural, primal screams of the socialites who are discovering that their wealth offers no armor against cold steel. High above, hidden in the blind spots of the estate, the architect of this chaos watches through a lens, his laughter silent, ghostly vibration in the earpieces of those who move in the shadows. But the true horror is not the attack itself, it is the strategy emerging from the carnage. In the heart of the panic, the Kwon family begins to play a game of shadows. Orders are whispered into comms, cold and decisive, mapping out a future written in blood. They are not merely reacting to the violence, they are harvesting it. The command is chilling: turn the victims into the culprits, reshape the narrative while the bodies are still warm, and ensure that the blood spilled in their garden serves the survival of the dynasty. As Lee-yeon watches the security details and the staff, people she greeted just moments ago, begin to move with a predatory, synchronized intent, she realizes the trap has closed. The garden is no longer an exit. It is a labyrinth. And as Kwon Chae-woo and his counterparts pivot, transforming from protectors into executioners, Lee-yeon understands that the most dangerous person in the estate is not the sniper in the distance, but the one standing right beside her, preparing to paint the lawn with the blood of their own kind to preserve a lie. The silence that follows the first wave of gunfire is the most terrifying sound of all. It is the sound of a family eating its own to survive. The pristine grounds of the estate have become a grotesque theater of war. What began as a charity auction for the elite has dissolved into a frantic, jagged struggle for survival, as the invisible hands pulling the strings of the Kwon Empire finally turn the knives inward. The garden, once meticulously manicured for the enjoyment of the wealthy, now drinks deep of a much darker harvest, its soil churning under the impact of heavy ordnance and the desperate, stumbling feet of the dying. Kwon Chae-woo moves through this carnage like a blade unsheathed. He has discarded the mask of the devoted lover, replaced by the cold, calculating efficiency of a man who has anticipated this slaughter for years. He is not merely fighting to survive, he is orchestrating the final act of a long-planned coup, turning his own family's mercenaries against them. His orders are clinical, his movements lethal, and yet, the entirety of his focus is pinned to one singular, fragile point: Lee-yeon. Lee-yeon, meanwhile, is trapped in a waking nightmare. The world has narrowed to the sensory overload of catastrophe, the acrid, suffocating scent of spent gunpowder, the rhythmic, thunderous rattle of automatic fire, and the sight of bodies falling with the limp, heavy finality of discarded dolls. She is a witness to the dismantling of her own sanctuary. When she finds herself cowering beneath the skeletal remains of a shattered table, the cold metal of a gun muzzle looms over her like the shadow of an executioner. The line between life and oblivion has never been thinner. Then, the screech of tires cuts through the cacophony. Kwon Chae-woo appears, a beacon of violent protection amidst the smoke. He is a blur of desperate motion, his every action fueled by a primal need to pluck her from the jaws of the machine he helped set in motion. He is a paradox of tenderness and lethality, shielding her with his own body as bullets stitch patterns of ruin into the metal and glass around them. The air is thick with the fog of smoke grenades, a grey, shifting curtain that hides them from the gaze of unseen snipers. But as he presses her into the dirt, Lee-yeon sees the dark bloom of warmth spreading across his back. He is rigid, his expression an iron-wrought mask, but the tremors in his hands betray the reality of the price he is paying to keep her intact. He is not just a protector, he is an architect of chaos who has realized, too late, that the most precious thing in the garden is the very one he risked putting in the line of fire. As the engine of the getaway car groans and fails, and the relentless hail of lead continues to shred their only shield, he pulls her close, his voice a low, gravelly vow against her ear. Outside the smoke, the garden is a graveyard. Inside, the man who would tear down an empire just to watch her breathe is bleeding out, his eyes locked onto hers with a possessiveness that outlasts the gunfire. The exit is blocked, the staff are ghosts, and as the last of their cover begins to disintegrate, a final, chilling question remains. Is this his attempt at redemption, or the final, inevitable tightening of his grip? The garden, once a masterpiece of curated elegance, now exists only as a graveyard of memories, its soil turned over by the tread of boots and the violent rain of lead. The air that hangs over the estate is thick, not with the scent of blooming flora, but with the cloying, metallic rot of a day that refuses to end. Even weeks later, the phantom warmth of blood on her palms feels like a second skin, a stain that no amount of scrubbing can ever truly scour away. Kwon Chae-woo is gone, swallowed by the chaos he helped ignite. The news cycles churn with the cold, sterile language of international crises, abductions, rebels, diplomatic fallout, but for Lee-yeon, the reality is far more intimate. She is a woman untethered, moving through the hollowed-out corridors of the mansion like a ghost haunting her own life. She remains the head gardener, a role that once promised simplicity, now turned into a grim responsibility, weeding out the debris of a massacre, planting new life over the places where men met their ends. Every time she leans into the earth to replace a patch of grass, she finds the remnants of the slaughter. A stray casing, a shard of glass, a hollow in the dirt that suggests the shape of a falling body. Each discovery sends a shiver of vertigo through her, the world spinning until the skyline tilts and the horizon blurs. She has become an archaeologist of her own trauma, digging up the past in a place that demands she bury it. She carries a secret now, a quiet pulse beneath her own skin that anchors her to a man who might already be dust. She remembers his confession, the way he clung to her as the life ebbed from him, the fractured, desperate honesty of a man who realized too late that his empire was a poor substitute for the woman he had lost. He had offered up his memory, his power, and his blood, all to bridge the distance between them. Lee-yeon touches her abdomen, a reflex born of a hope as fragile as a petal. She looks out over the restored garden, where the new grass is just beginning to take root, camouflaging the violence beneath. The transition from peace to agony was swift, a cruel collision of fates that left her questioning every choice that brought her to this threshold. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn, she hears her name. The voice is clipped, professional, and entirely out of place in the solitude she has cultivated. She turns, her heart stuttering against her ribs, wondering if the past has finally come back to reclaim its debt. Is it a ghost, or is the hunter returning to the garden where he was broken? The sterile air of the medical sweet tastes of ozone and synthetic dread. Kwon Chae-woo lies motionless, a sculpture of ruined anatomy and iron-willed survival, his breathing a slow, rhythmic ghost of a man who once defined power. Lee-yeon stands over him, the memory of his darkest pleas, his demand to be pruned, to be stripped of agency and reduced to a mere, water-starved plant, pressing against her ribs like a physical weight. She watches the rise and fall of his chest, her fingers trembling as she brushes the skin of a man who, despite the punctured organs and the metal lodged in his frame, refuses to surrender. But the silence is short-lived. The arrival of Kwon Chae-suk is like a drop of ink in a clear glass. He looms over his fallen brother, his face a chilling mask of complex, unreadable intensity. He is the architect of a different kind of ruin, his presence radiating an icy, predatory curiosity that makes the skin crawl. He does not offer comfort, he offers a poisoned bargain. With a voice that drips with the honeyed malice of a serpent, he dangles the promise of absolute escape, a life of safety, prosperity, and oblivion, provided Lee-yeon agrees to vanish into the folds of his influence and leave his brother to a slow, hollowed-out decay. The tension in the room snaps with a singular, impossible event. A hand, devoid of conscious life, lashes out to pin Lee-yeon's wrist. It is a reflex of soul, a tether reaching through the void of a coma, anchoring her to the very man Ki-suk wants her to abandon. The air grows heavy, charged with the static of a secret war fought in the architecture of a pulse. Ki-suk's gaze, fleeting and unnerving, drops to the slight, hidden swell of her abdomen, a secret life that binds her to the wreckage in the bed with a finality that no bribe can undo. That night, the physical world begins to warp. A call from the past brings news that defies all reason. The place where they buried the evidence of their desperation, where they laid the memory of Kwon Chae-woo to rest, is no longer silent. Lee-yeon stares at the digital image, her breath hitching in her throat. The earth, which should have held only secrets and decay, has been broken by a singular, defiant miracle. A sapling, fragile and impossibly verdant, has breached the surface of the grave. It is a defiance of biology and logic. It is a testament to a man who, even when cast into the dark, chose to sprout anew, reaching for the light of a woman who had tried to bury him. Her tears are not for the loss of her former life. They are for the terrifying, beautiful realization that some roots go deeper than death. As she traces the image of the leaf on her glowing screen, she understands the trap. She is being drawn back into the cycle, and the man in the bed is not just a patient, he is a force of nature that refuses to be cut down. The grave is not a final resting place, but a garden, and the harvest is only just beginning. The vanity mirror reflects a stranger. Lee-yeon stares at the face staring back, a porcelain mask painted with practiced grace, eyes sharpened by coal and lips slicked with a sheen of artificial warmth. She is draped in a gown the color of fresh snow, a garment that feels less like finery and more like a shroud. Every emerald-encrusted accessory feels like a shackle, heavy and cold against her skin. She has been groomed, pressed, and polished into a trophy for the evening's festivities, an aesthetic compliment to the man who now stands behind her. Kwon Ki-suk appears in the reflection, his movements as precise and predatory as a ticking clock. He is the image of impeccable control, fastening his cufflinks with a calmness that is more unsettling than any outburst. His touch on her shoulder is an icy reminder of the bargain they have struck, a social theater where she must play the partner while the man she carries in her heart lies broken in a room elsewhere. He is courteous, almost gentle, yet the air between them is thin, vibrating with the unspoken weight of his ultimatum. The Hwaido opening ceremony is a spectacle of opulence. Beneath the shimmering chandeliers, the elite of Hwaido City move with the rhythmic elegance of predators at a gala. They toast to progress and botanical marvels, mesmerized by holograms of a paradise built on layers of illicit coin. Lee-yeon plays her part, her smile an involuntary tremor, her spirit retreating into the deep, quiet places of her mind. She waits for the exit, for the blessed silence of the drive home, but as the ceremony wanes, the atmosphere shifts. The grand doors seal shut with a heavy, final thud. The golden light of the chandeliers bleeds into a deep, claustrophobic gloom as the blinds descend, cutting them off from the world outside. The room is no longer a hall of celebration. It has become a sanctuary for the initiated. Kwon Ki-suk ascends the stage, his features swallowed by the shadows, his voice a smooth, dangerous velvet. He introduces the centerpiece of his ambition, not a plant, but a poison. He calls it summer, a chemical ghost designed to unravel the architecture of the human mind, to weave nightmares from the threads of personal longing. As the elite sip their champagne, their faces flushing with the anticipation of a manufactured ecstasy, Lee-yeon feels the walls of her own reality beginning to vibrate. The name of the drug echoes against the half-forgotten warnings of those who tried to pull her from this path. She remembers the frantic pleas of her former mentor, the cryptic warnings about the pharmaceutical shadows behind the Kwon dynasty, and the sudden, sickening realization that she has walked, with eyes wide open, directly into the heart of the beast. She grips the fabric of her gown, her knuckles white. The room begins to feel smaller, the laughter of the guests turning into a discordant, bubbling hum. She is looking for the seam in the plan, the missing piece of the puzzle that has been obscured by wealth and tragedy. What is the price of a memory? And who owns the garden that grows it? As Ki-suk lifts his glass, his eyes find hers across the crowded, dimming room, a look that is less of a partner and more of an owner. The hallucinogen is already dissolving in the blood of the powerful, and as the first of them begin to sway, Lee-yeon realizes that the ceremony isn't an opening. It is an induction. And she is standing exactly where she was never meant to be. The air in the banquet hall has grown heavy, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the invisible, cloying sweetness of summer. Lee-yeon stands amidst a sea of the elite, their eyes glazed with a terrifying, serene detachment. They do not laugh or weep with abandon. They stand in a hallowed, manufactured trance, their souls seemingly offered up to a god of chemistry and memory distortion. The glass in Lee-yeon's hand is a poison disguised as nectar, a silent witness to a pharmaceutical empire built upon the bones of the past. The connection flashes in her mind. The name Summer, a cruel nod to a woman named Yoon Ju-ha, a ghost whose shadow still haunts the Kwon dynasty. When she speaks the name aloud, the atmosphere curdles. Kwon Chae-wook's mask slips, revealing a jagged, frantic madness lurking beneath his refined veneer. He leans into her space, his breath a cold draft against her ear, speaking of the dead with a venom that makes the very air shiver. The psychological tension is a vice, tightening until the room seems to tilt. Just as the darkness in Chae-wook's gaze threatens to consume her, the intrusion comes, a jarring, discordant strike of wood against marble. Kwon Chae-woo stands at the periphery, a wounded spectre leaning on a crutch, his presence a violent tear in the gala's tapestry. He looks unmoored, his pupils darting with a frantic, feverish recognition that doesn't quite align with the present. To him, the world has shifted. The woman he sees is an apparition in white, an object of agonizing longing that has been paraded before his enemies while he lay rotting in the dark. The backstory of his arrival is a descent into primal obsession. Even broken, with ribs knitting back together and limbs failing him, he had torn through the constraints of his recovery like a man possessed. Driven by the torturous image of Lee-yeon smiling on the arm of his brother, he had bypassed guards and ignored the screams of his own flesh, fueled by a singular, scorching fire, the need to confirm she had not abandoned him to the abyss. Now, he stands between them, an avatar of ruin, refusing to wither. His hand, once steady and lethal, trembles as he grips his support, but his resolve is a blade. He looks at Lee-yeon not as a survivor, but as a stolen treasure, his mind oscillating between the reality of her safety and the hallucinations of a man pushed to the brink of madness. The confrontation is fragile, a powder keg waiting for a spark. Chae-wook remains coiled, waiting, while Chae-woo's mere presence challenges the very foundation of the evening. Lee-yeon stands between these two brothers, caught in a gravitational pull of competing hungers. The drug in the room begins to take hold, blurring the edges of the ballroom until truth and fantasy become indistinguishable. Chae-woo's eyes, fixed on her with a hunger that defies his physical decay, suggest that he has arrived not to escort her home, but to drag her back into the fire with him. The doors remain shut. The music continues its soft, rhythmic pulse. And as the elite begin to lose themselves in their manufactured dreams, the brothers prepare to tear the reality apart. The banquet hall is no longer a room of stone and crystal. It is a distorting lens, a fractured reality where the past bleeds into the present like ink in water. Kwon Chae-woo stands amidst the glittering elite, his vision splintering. He is a man caught between the agony of his own broken body and the intoxicating, horrific pull of a drug that demands he confront the ghosts he has spent a lifetime trying to outrun. As he shoves his crutch between himself and his brother, the floor seems to liquefy. The ceiling descends like a closing jaw. And then, the world turns inside out. He is no longer the wounded, vengeful heir of a crime family. He is a boy, his hands suddenly small and uncalloused, the air smelling of damp earth and the sharp, pine-scented promise of a sanctuary that never really existed. The woman before him, Lee-yeon, melts into the form of the girl from the woods, the desolate figure who once wept beneath the trees while he provided the soundtrack to her solitude. The drug, that syrupy, golden poison called summer, has opened the vault of his psyche. He stares at Lee-yeon, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, his youthful face flushed with a fervor that borders on the divine. He doesn't see the gala. He sees the moonlit nights where he gathered her handwritten notes like fallen leaves. He is intoxicated by the sheer proximity of her, the reality of a face he once only dared to watch from the shadows. But the memory is not a gentle lullaby. It is a siren, warning of a collapse that is already underway. The vision shifts violently. The serenity of the forest is shredded by the guttural shouts of men who recognize him not as a child, but as property. The air fills with the copper tang of fear and the desperate, ragged breath of a mother clutching her son's shoulder as if to anchor him against the encroaching tide of their ruin. It is the moment of disintegration. The realization hits him with the force of a landslide. The life they led was a lie, a frantic, hidden existence that was always destined to be hunted. He is being torn away from the only version of himself that knew how to love without violence. In the hallucination, he is a beast of burden, pleading with his mother to flee, to run toward the house beneath the mountain, to the girl who listened to his cello. He is handing over his childhood like an inheritance, burying his favorite music beneath the roots of a tree, frantically trying to weave a thread of connection between his past and the woman he now loves with a desperate, destructive intensity. He stands in the banquet hall, his crutch held like a weapon, tears tracing invisible paths through his sweat-drenched face. He is caught in the crossfire of his own brain, witnessing the exact moment his innocence was traded for survival. And as he grips the crutch, his knuckles white with the strain of holding onto two different lifetimes, he looks at Lee-yeon, the girl beneath the tree, the woman in the white dress, and realizes the cost of the path he chose. The music of his childhood is echoing in his ears, distorted and sharp. He reaches for her, his eyes wide and terrified, as the world of the gala begins to dissolve completely, leaving him alone in the dark, clutching the ghost of a promise he never got to keep. The question remains, when the drug wears off, and he wakes up in the wreckage of the present, will he find that he has buried his heart beneath that tree forever? The banquet hall is a fractured mirror, and Kwon Chae-woo is the stone thrown directly into its center. As the hallucinogenic vapor of summer takes its toll, the timeline of his existence unravels, looping him back into the harrowing chasm of his own youth. He stands in the present, a man scarred by power and politics, but his hands, in the landscape of his mind, are small, trembling, and clutching the fabric of a woman who was both his sanctuary and his captor. The transition is brutal. The boy who once hid in the mountain mists, fed on stolen moments and maternal warmth, is forcibly ripped away by the sterile, clinical cruelty of the men who claimed to save him. He recalls the voices of the psychiatrists, those hollow architects of his identity, who systematically dismantled his world. They fed him the narrative of his own tragedy, twisting his mother's desperate, protective love into the terminology of kidnapping and brainwashing. They stripped him of his history, piece by agonizing piece, replacing the memory of a mother's kiss and the healing warmth of her forehead against his with the cold, hard logic of resentment. He had been molded into a weapon by the very family he was taught to serve, forced to bury the boy who loved music beneath layers of a man who only understood how to destroy. But the drug is a cruel truth-teller. Beneath the layers of his performative cynicism, the boy he buried still lives. In this vivid, drug-fueled regression, he is back at the moment of the fracture, the final, agonizing farewell. He sees his mother, not as the shadow-wielding kidnapper of his trauma, but as a woman fractured by the weight of a world that wouldn't let them breathe. He feels the phantom ache of the fever, the taste of bitter medicine, and the searing, desperate intensity of a love that was defined by its secrecy. He kneels in the banquet hall, though to the onlookers, he is merely a man swaying on his crutches. In his mind, he is at his mother's feet, a man fully grown but weeping with the heart of a child. He offers her the only thing he has left, an apology for the path he has chosen, a confession of his secret, burning desire to burn his own legacy to the ground. He recognizes that his hatred for the Kwon name was the only fuel he had, but he realizes, too late, that the hatred was a prison. He pivots toward the ghost of his future, Lee-yeon. She is the new melody in his shattered life, the only thing that makes the prospect of a future feel like something other than a death sentence. By letting go of the mother who shaped him, he is finally, violently, claiming the right to protect the woman who defines his current reality. Lee-yeon watches him from the periphery of the hotel room, a witness to a man being dismantled and put back together in the dark. She sees the tears carving paths through his composure, the way he clings to the air as if holding onto a dissolving dream. The room is quiet, save for the ragged, hitching gasps of a man confessing to ghosts. As the hallucination begins to wane, the silence between them grows heavy, charged with the weight of everything he has just confessed. He is a man who has lived as a sinner for his family, but he is finally waking up to the reality that his true life, and the true music of his soul, has been standing in front of him all along. He opens his eyes, the remnants of the drug fading, leaving only the raw, exposed nerves of a man who has nothing left to hide. He looks at Lee-yeon, not as a prize or a victim, but as the woman who survived the same darkness he did. The walls are closing in, the Kwon family is a ticking time bomb, and as he reaches out a hand, no longer for support, but for connection, they both realize that the sanctuary they once imagined is gone, replaced by the terrifying, beautiful necessity of facing the coming storm together. The morning light bleeds through the curtains, casting long, fractured shadows across the sheets. Kwon Chae-woo wakes to the smell of coffee and the quiet, agonizing sincerity of a woman who has spent her life trying to map the terrain of a monster. Lee-yeon sits near him, her hands trembling as she attempts to articulate the impossible. The fear, the curiosity, and the singular, gravitational pull she feels toward a man who has terrified her as much as he has consumed her. She speaks of her attempts to look elsewhere, to find comfort in the normalcy of others, only to realize that every road led back to the same destination, him. Her confession is a fragile, crystalline thing, a declaration of love uttered from behind a wall of paralyzing dread. She admits that she watched him sleep, that she found him terrifying, and yet she chose to keep him in her world. Chae-woo, now fully awake to the weight of her words, feels the ghost of his past self standing over him. He remembers how he once dismissed her love as a tactical lie, a performance designed to deceive. He had been a man blinded by vengeance, unable to see the courage required for a victim to invite her executioner into her bed. He pulls her onto his lap, the physical contact a desperate attempt to anchor himself to the truth. He asks her the question he once posed in the heat of a jealous haze, but this time the answer hits him with the force of a revelation. She didn't want the others. She only wanted to go home, to the cramped, humble space where they were just two people, before the weight of the Kwon Empire, the blood, and the lies turned them into enemies. But the peace is a mirage. The edges of the memory begin to fray. The sunlight distorts, the walls buckle, and the sanctuary of the past dissolves into a violent, spinning vortex. He fights to stay, to inhabit this moment of clarity where no one has yet been shattered, but the drug, the relentless, creeping shadow of summer, drags him back into the abyss. He makes a silent, desperate vow to the void. He will find his way back to her, through the tunnel of his own fractured psyche, to the reality where she waits. When he opens his eyes again, the warmth is gone. The air is cold, heavy with a metallic scent of tension. He is holding a cello string, the wire biting deep into his flesh until it draws a thin, white line of pain across his skin. His fingers are pale, bloodless, rigid with the sudden, violent return of a different memory, a memory of absolute, unvarnished cruelty. He sees Lee-yeon, her eyes wide with a shock that he recognizes all too well. He is no longer the man seeking redemption in the morning light. He is the man he swore he would never be again. The script of his past has taken over, and his tongue, moving of its own accord, spits words that taste like ash. The air in the room turns arctic. He looks at her, the woman he has vowed to protect, and watches as the trap closes around them both. The transition is complete. He is back in the heart of the disaster, and the next words to leave his lips are designed to shatter the very soul he had just been trying to save. The nightmare has not ended. It has simply started over, and this time, he is not just the witness, he is the architect of the ruin. The room is a theater of shadows, and Kwon Chae-woo is both the audience and the villain of his own recurring nightmare. He watches the past play out with the detachment of a man seeing his own sins projected onto a screen. He observes his younger self, blinded by a toxic cocktail of insecurity and manufactured rage, forcing a cold, calculated intimacy upon Lee-yeon. He watches himself, the man he once was, pushing past her boundaries, his hands and voice steeped in a cruelty that now serves as a jagged blade against his own heart. But as the memory unfolds, the modern Chae-woo, trapped within the drug-induced trance, begins to violently resist. He reaches into the fabric of the dream, a frantic spectre trying to pull his younger self away from the woman he is tormenting. He screams in the silence of his own mind, begging for a different outcome, a different choice. The dissonance is deafening. He feels the phantom tremor of her body beneath him and the suffocating realization that every act of aggression was a desperate, failed attempt to mask a love that felt too terrifying to own. In a sudden shift of gravity, the act of dominance crumbles into an act of surrender. He finds himself kneeling on the floor, his head resting against her knees, the crushing weight of his own regrets paralyzing him. The anger that fueled his past actions now feels like a hollow, bitter poison. He realizes that while he was busy weaponizing his pain, she was fighting a silent, daily war to survive a world that constantly reminded her of her own supposed insignificance. The scene shifts again, bleeding into the memory of a public humiliation, a slap that left a mark on her skin and a deeper, more permanent scar on his conscience. He hears his past self mocking her, weaponizing the very sincerity he should have been protecting. But this time, the loop breaks. Within the hallucination, Chae-woo reaches out, his fingers tracing the phantom injury on her lip. He decides to rewrite the script, not to change the past, but to finally say the words that have been choked by his own pride for years. He speaks of the helplessness he felt, the primal, aching need to have stood in her place to take the blows. He confesses that his malice was never hate. It was a frantic, maladaptive response of a man who could not bear the thought of her suffering while he stood idle, trapped by his own legacy. He looks at the Lee-yeon of his memories, the woman who was brave enough to protect a monster, and realizes with a jolt of clarity that this is a ghost. The memory, however sweet or painful, is a cage. The banquet hall, the hotel room, the forest floor, they all begin to splinter and dissolve into dust. The false reality, the constructed haven of his regrets, cannot hold him any longer. He realizes the futility of chasing a past that can never be mended, of lingering in a dream where he can rewrite his mistakes but never actually embrace the woman who is waiting in the cold, harsh light of the present. The emptiness that follows is not a void, it is a wake-up call. He stares at his own reflection, a man composed of secrets, trauma, and a desperate, singular hunger for redemption. He has finished his tour of his own wreckage. He is ready to wake up. As the dream collapses into the silence of his own mind, he moves toward the exit of his own consciousness. He doesn't need to save the girl in his memories anymore. He needs to reach the woman who is currently holding the keys to his future. The thread of the hallucination snaps. Somewhere, in a world that is real, cold, and waiting, he feels the first, sharp breath of the man who is finally coming home. The transition is no longer a descent, it is a collapse. The air in the memory is thick with the discordant screech of cello strings being pulled beyond their breaking point, a sonic scream that mirrors the snapping of Kwon Chae-woo's internal fuse. He stands in the wreckage of his own history, his hands, the hands of a man who once lived for destruction, gripping the neck of the instrument that served as his soundtrack of misery. He is not just breaking wood and wire. He is systematically dismantling the last vestiges of his own sanity. The woman before him, Lee-yeon, is a portrait of quiet, desperate endurance. She stands amidst the shrapnel of his rage, her face a map of tears and unvoiced truths. She had tried to speak, to reach through the hurricane of his delusions, but he had been deafened by his own jealousy. Now, as the memory loops and stutters, he is forced to listen to the silence he once imposed upon her. He kneels, the sharp edges of his previous cruelty still cutting into his current awareness. He reaches for her, a gesture of profound, agonizing impotence. He wants to gather the shards of her spirit, to offer the absolution he denied her when it mattered. He validates her choices, her lies, her defense, her survival, with a hollow, aching tenderness. He tells her she was right to fight, right to strike, right to lie. He tries to offer her the sanctuary of his own devotion, promising that he will be the wall that shields her from the consequences of her rebellion. But the dream has its own cruel architecture. As he pleads for the lie of their marriage to continue, to bloom in the quiet corners of their lives, the vision shifts. Lee-yeon's expression hardens into something crystalline and cold. The warmth that once defined her gaze is replaced by a surgical, detached malice. She turns his own words back upon him, a mirror held to his face, reflecting the exact moment he destroyed the bridge between them. The nightmare is not that she hates him, it is that she has become his own reflection. She speaks of discarding him, of erasing the memories that anchored them to the earth, echoing the very cruelties he once inflicted upon her. He watches, paralyzed, as she unilaterally severs the connection he is fighting a war in his own mind to restore. The pain of her rejection is visceral, a slow, agonizing amputation of his own heart. He stands before her, a man confronted by his own past cruelty, and the realization hits with the force of a tidal wave. She is not the woman who needs saving. She is the woman who has finally learned how to survive him. The final blow is the silence. When he reaches for the tether of her love, the echo of his own past hubris returns to haunt him. He asks for the declaration of her devotion, a ghost of a memory to keep him warm in the dark, and her response is a void so absolute, it threatens to swallow the entire reality. She strips away the illusion of their bond, leaving him standing in the center of a barren landscape, clutching at the hem of a ghost. The music has stopped. The instrument is in pieces. And as the final thread of his hallucination begins to unravel, he realizes that the hardest part of the nightmare is not that he will lose her, it is that he has already earned her silence. The hallucination is beginning to fray at the edges, turning a blinding, sterile white that threatens to consume the man who stands at its center. Kwon Chae-woo is a man unraveling, pinned to the spot by the brutal, honest articulation of a woman who has finally stopped performing the role of the submissive wife. Lee-yeon's words are not just a rejection, they are a dismantling of the sanctuary he spent his entire life building out of blood, obsession, and artifice. She reminds him that her affection was a survival tactic, a mask worn to appease a monster who never bothered to look beneath the surface. He listens to the truth, a bitter, jagged pill, and feels the physical manifestation of his own collapse. His body, caught in the throes of a neurological and emotional convulsion, betrays him. The man who once lived for the hunt, who thrived in the shadows of violence, is reduced to a creature of pathetic, desperate yearning. He confesses the transformation that his life with her once sparked, the shift from hands stained with iron to hands softened by water and garden soil. He realizes now that the mundane, the domestic, the quiet rhythm of two people breathing in the dark was the only true music he had ever played. He reaches for her, a final, reckless leap of faith, pulling her into an embrace that is both an apology and a cage. He tells her she can leave, that she can cast him aside into the deepest, most meaningless reaches of her life, provided that at the very end, at the final, closing breath, she comes back for him. It is a terrifying, beautiful admission of servitude. He is no longer the hunter, he is the land, the foundation waiting for her to return to the earth. But the dream is a relentless judge. Just as he attempts to ground their connection in this raw, bleeding sincerity, the reality of the Kwon dynasty's violence tears through the veil. The villagers, the ghosts of the forest he once ravaged, descend like a vengeful swarm. They are the physical manifestation of his past sins, clawing at him, trying to pull Lee-yeon from his arms. He stands as an immovable bulwark, shielding her from the consequences of a tragedy he orchestrated, even as he realizes the chasm between them is now, truly, unbridgeable. He is the man who cut down the tree, and she is the woman who spent her life trying to heal the forest. The light becomes absolute. The headache is a tectonic shift in his skull, the herald of the end. He feels the vertigo of a soul being flung through the corridors of time. When the world finally re-emerges, the texture of his reality has changed. The instrument that once represented his only connection to the sublime has been transformed into a weapon. The cello, once the bridge to their souls, is now the cold, hard tool of her vengeance. He stands before her, trembling, as the dream finally disintegrates. He has reached the end of the tunnel, the place where his past choices finally catch up to his present desires. The white fog of the hallucination recedes to reveal the sharp, biting clarity of the consequences. There is no more music. There is only the woman, the instrument of her reckoning, and a man who is finally, irrevocably ready to pay the price for the life he destroyed. The silence that follows is heavy, expectant, and lethal. The stage is set for the final movement. The atmosphere in the room is suffocating, thick with the chemical residue of summer and the lingering echoes of a past that refuses to stay buried. Lee-yeon stands trapped, a silent witness to a man being hollowed out and refilled by his own ghosts. She watches as Kwon Chae-woo navigates the labyrinth of his psyche, his voice weaving a tapestry of childhood innocence and adult despair, a narrative that drags her down into the same drowning depths. She hears his frantic, youthful pleas for sanctuary, his desperate attempts to leave behind proof of his existence, a hidden memory, a buried disc, a promise of a future that was always destined to be stolen. It is a haunting melody, one that she realizes has been vibrating in the back of her own mind for years. The drug has turned him into an open wound, and she is the one forced to touch the exposed nerves of his history. He does not show her the golden sunlight of their better days. He drags her through the razor wire of their worst. He relives the betrayals, the moments of cruelty, and the agonizing disintegration of their trust. And yet, amidst the chaos of his delirium, he keeps returning to her, offering apologies that taste of salt and ash, his devotion as frightening as it is unrelenting. When the medical staff finally arrives, they see only a patient in the throes of a fever dream, but Lee-yeon remains the captive audience to his confession. Every fragment of the past he discards, she absorbs. She is bruised by the sheer velocity of his memories, unable to escape the gravity of his fixation. Then, the silence hits. The frantic energy of the hallucinations drops away, replaced by the heavy, crystalline clarity of the present. Chae-woo wakes. His gaze, once wild and unfocused, begins to sharpen, anchoring itself onto her with a terrifying intensity. Lee-yeon's heart hammers a frantic rhythm against her ribs. In her mind, she is already halfway to the sanctuary of Hwaido Island, counting down the agonizing seconds until their contract expires. She tells herself that her survival depends on distance, on silence, on treating the man before her as a void she cannot afford to cross. She masks her tremors with the brittle veneer of composure, pretending that the torrent of his confessions never happened. She speaks of mundane annoyances, his volume, his excess, the inconvenience of his presence, her voice a desperate shield against the vulnerability shining in his eyes. She is a woman trying to build a wall out of thin air, terrified that one wrong word will seal her fate within the walls of the Kwon estate forever. But the past is not so easily discarded. As she attempts to retreat, To distance herself from the dizzying pull of his presence, she feels the tug of fabric, the sudden, anchored weight of his hand upon her skirt. He does not let go. He is no longer speaking in riddles, but his silence is louder than any confession. She stands there, back turned, lungs straining for air, caught between the instinct to run and the paralyzing realization that the man holding her is no longer the monster she feared, but someone entirely, dangerously new. She does not turn around. She waits for the next move, her pulse racing in the quiet room, knowing that whatever he says next will either break the final tether of their connection or bind them to a future she is not yet ready to face. The desperation in a dying grip is a terrifying thing to witness, especially when the hands holding onto you belong to a man who has mastered the art of ruin. As Kwon Chae-woo clutches the fabric of her skirt, his knuckles are strained to the point of looking like bare bone. His breath hitches, a ragged, painful sound as he struggles to anchor himself to the waking world. He whispers a fractured wish, a deep, aching desire that she had truly come to steal him away from his destiny. But the shadow in his gaze is too heavy, too suffocating. Lee-yeon pulls away with a sudden, defensive jerk, the heat of a rising fever flushing her skin as she flees the room, leaving him alone to contend with the wreckage of his mind. Time passes, and the grand estate attempts to coat its recent bloodshed with a veneer of sterile normalcy. New faces fill the empty corridors, trying to wash away the lingering scent of gunpowder and betrayal. Chae-woo retreats to his annex, a wounded predator tending to his broken pieces, yet he refuses to stay hidden. The next morning, he appears at her threshold, limping, battered, but carrying a neatly packed lunchbox as if he were nothing more than an ordinary partner trying to please his companion. The sheer irony of the sight triggers a wave of silent, suffocating fury in Lee-yeon. How can a man so dangerous look so painfully domestic? He is an invasive presence, disrupting the careful boundaries she has set for her survival. She snatches the offering, passing him without a word, but his gaze clings to her back like a physical weight, tracking her until she disappears around the corner. Seeking refuge in her work, Lee-yeon stands by the artificial lake, confronting a different kind of parasite. The lush green covering the banks looks beautiful to an untrained eye, but it is a toxic illusion. An invasive thornbush has taken root, aggressively wrapping itself around the native trees, choking their trunks and blocking the sunlight needed for survival. It is a slow, agonizing suffocation, a botanical execution. Armed with heavy tools and protective gear, the maintenance crew prepares to eradicate the nuisance. Lee-yeon joins them, desperate to lose herself in the violent, cleansing rhythm of the blades. But the human mind is a treacherous archive, with every snap of her shears and every tear of the vines. Chae-woo's voice echoes through the chambers of her thoughts. His drug-induced confessions replay like a broken record, reminding her of the fragile, bleeding humanity buried beneath his scars. He had apologized for the terror he caused. He had confessed that the short time they spent playing house was the only true peace he had ever known. He had begged her to discard him, to cast him away 1,000 times, as long as she claimed him at the very end of all things. She shakes her head frantically, trying to drown out the phantom voice with the mechanical roar of the weed whackers. She reminds herself that her liberation is only a matter of days away. The contract is nearing its end, and the shores of her quiet island are almost within reach. She has always been a master of self-deception, a professional at pretending not to feel the fire while standing directly in the embers. But the thorn bush is resilient, its vines wrapping tighter around the wood, refusing to let go. Just as she forces herself to strike harder, a sudden, violent gust of wind sweeps across the lake, twisting the thorny branches around her hands. A sharp, agonizing sting cuts through the thick layers of her protective glove, drawing blood and shattering her fragile illusion of control, leaving the bitter reality that some wounds, much like the man waiting in the annex, cut far too deep to ever truly be uprooted. The pain in her wrist is nothing compared to the violent, discordant symphony playing inside Lee-yeon's chest. The thorn bush that pierced her glove has left a mark, but it is the invisible vines of Kwon Chae-woo's lingering presence that are truly drawing blood. She stands in the garden, the air thick with the smell of crushed greenery and her own rising panic, until the sheer weight of her own suppressed emotions forces her to abandon the pretense of work. She leaves the garden behind, shedding her protective gear like a second skin she no longer trusts to keep the world at bay. She marches toward the annex, her footsteps a rhythmic, aggressive percussion against the marble floors. She is a woman who has reached her limit, caught in a suffocating game of tug-of-war with a man she desperately needs to forget. The room she enters is a sanctuary of shadows. Black curtains bleed the sunlight dry, and the hum of an air purifier fills the silence with a sterile, mechanical indifference. Kwon Chae-woo sits in the gloom, his face illuminated by the flickering, sickly glow of a laptop screen, a screen he snaps shut with a speed that reeks of desperate, guilty secrets. Lee-yeon does not care for his surveillance. She is a woman unmoored, the dam of her composure finally breaking. She pours out the years of confusion, the crushing weight of a gratitude she never asked for, and the paralyzing guilt he has forcibly grafted onto her soul. She is a soldier who has returned from a war only to find the battlefield has followed her home. She is red-faced, breathless, and trembling with the sheer, visceral rejection of everything he represents. He moves toward her, a man literally stitched together by pain, yet he ignores his own suffering to close the distance. He stands before her, not as the hunter or the tyrant, but as a man watching the only thing he has ever truly loved decide to burn the bridge between them. The tension in the room is a physical force, pulling at the seams of their reality. Lee-yeon demands an end to the charade, her voice a cold, sharp blade intended to excise him from her life once and for all. She is terrified of the influence he still holds, the way he keeps wrapping himself around her peace, an invasive species of a man she cannot seem to prune away. But then, the monster changes his rhythm. He does not reach for her. He does not demand. He does not apologize for his past crimes in a way that reeks of manipulation. Instead, he retreats. He acknowledges the graveyard of their shared history, admitting that the summer of their intimacy is as dead as the trees he once cut down. He speaks with a chilling, hollow clarity. He isn't asking for the past back. He is asking for a beginning, a concept so foreign and terrifying that it leaves Lee-yeon breathless. The silence that follows is heavy with the weight of unsaid things. He takes a step back, a gesture of radical, agonizing submission, leaving Lee-yeon standing in the dark, her heart hammering against her ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. The trap has shifted. She came here to sever the cord, but he has just offered her a new rope entirely. And as she looks at the man who has finally stopped trying to claim her, she realizes with a jolt of pure dread that her path to Hwaido Island has just become infinitely more dangerous. The air in the room is thin, saturated with the scent of antiseptic and the heavy, electric tension of a man trying to reinvent himself from the wreckage of his own ghost. Kwon Chae-woo stands before Lee-yeon, not as the wounded animal of the annex, but as a man stripping away his own legend. He dismantles the caricature she has held onto, the husband in a coma, the violent heir, the monster under the bed, and replaces it with fragments of a stranger. A degree earned in a foreign land. A mastery of German. A life of solitude that she never bothered to inquire about. He is not asking for a return to the past. He is demanding a reckoning with the present. His gaze is a blade, sharp and terrifying, as he declares that his only real competitor was the man he used to be. It is a cynical, darkly human declaration of war against his own history. Lee-yeon watches him, her heart a frantic bird trapped in her chest. She is a woman who has spent her life building fortresses out of silence and avoidance, and he is methodically tearing them down, one brick at a time. When he leans into the space between them, his posture loose, his collarbones exposed, the danger isn't just in what he says, it is in his terrifying adaptability. He offers to be whatever she desires, a chameleon of devotion, even dipping into a wry, sharp-edged humor that makes her skin crawl with a familiar, dangerous magnetism. She counters with the only weapon she has left, the ancient spirit tree. 500 years of history, a silent, rooted inheritance that no mortal man could hope to replace or restore. She watches his face stiffen, the silence stretching between them until it feels like a physical barrier. She has thrown an impossible gauntlet, a riddle he cannot solve, and for a moment, it feels like she has finally secured her escape. The days that follow are a blur of forced productivity and quiet relief. She folds her life into a suitcase, the rhythmic snapping of buckles sounding like the countdown to her liberation. Chae-woo continues his daily pilgrimage with his lunchbox and his crutches, but the silence between them is different now. It is the heavy, loaded silence of a man holding his breath. Then, the phone rings. The voice on the other end is mundane, professional, and yet it feels like the universe is closing a trap. The garden maintenance team has been given clearance for the restricted sector, the old, decaying structure behind the annex. The words land like a hammer blow against her chest. That building was once the private sanctuary of the youngest son of the Kwon family. Lee-yeon stands in the center of her room, her hand frozen on the handle of her suitcase. She has been trying to bury the past, to prune the thorns of this family from her own skin, but the path she is now being asked to walk leads directly into the heart of the labyrinth. She is heading toward the origin, toward the room where the monster was forged, and she realizes with a sudden, sinking dread that the contract was never about gardening. It was about bringing her to the center of the nest. And as she stares at the phone, she knows that whatever she finds in that room will be the final piece of a puzzle she was never meant to solve. The air in the old annex is thin, heavy with the scent of damp wood and the suffocating pressure of a secret finally straining to break its seal. Lee-yeon moves through the hallway like a ghost, each footstep eliciting a mournful, rhythmic creak from the floorboards, a sound that feels less like architecture and more like a warning. She is stepping into the anatomy of a man's ruin, the room where the younger, untainted version of Kwon Chae-woo was systematically hollowed out. She finds him there, the other Kwon, standing as a stationary shadow against the backdrop of an autumn rain that lashes the window with relentless, frantic hands. Kwon Chae-woo does not turn. He is a silhouette carved from malice, his presence grounding the room in a cold, stagnant stillness. As she hovers in the doorway, the reality of the space hits her. The furniture is too small, a painful relic of a childhood that ended in a cage. But it is the floor beneath them that holds the true weight of the horror. Chae-woo begins to weave a narrative of such calculated cruelty that it turns the air in the room acidic. He speaks of the past not as a series of events, but as a masterpiece of manipulation. He reveals the architects of Chae-woo's madness, how he played with the boy's heart, feeding him lies about his mother's death until the truth became a weapon. He paints a picture of a young man drowning in grief, abandoning the strings of his cello to dive into the murky, violent politics of the family, all to hunt for a truth that had been buried under inches of concrete and layers of deception. Lee-yeon's skin goes cold. She remembers the way Chae-woo looked at her, the raw, bleeding resentment, the self-loathing that burned through his eyes like acid. She had thought it was his penance. She had thought it was his personal hell. Then, Chae-woo delivers the final, soul-shattering turn. He speaks of a wager, a twisted game of starvation and sound, where the mother's only hope for sustenance was tethered to the music played by the very son who believed she was a ghost. The room seems to tilt on its axis. Lee-yeon feels the floorboards beneath her feet pulse with the phantom vibrations of a cello, realizing that every note Chae-woo played in those days was, in fact, a heartbeat he was unknowingly stealing from his own mother. The revelation is so grotesque, so profoundly violating, that the sound of the rain outside becomes a deafening roar. She stands on the precipice of a truth that redefines every moment of their shared suffering. She is no longer just a participant in a loveless contract. She is the witness to a tragedy so complete, it makes the idea of escape feel like a fantasy. As Chae-woo's laughter ripples through the gloom, low and jagged as broken glass, Lee-yeon realizes the trap has not just been set, it has already been sprung. The door behind her doesn't just close. It feels like the final seal on a grave. The air in the room is heavy, thick with the metallic tang of old violence and the suffocating history of the Kwon estate. Kwon Chae-woo stands there, a man carved from obsession and malice, recounting a past that feels less like a memory and more like a crime scene. He speaks of Yoon Joo-ha not as a woman, but as a puzzle he failed to solve. He describes his attempts to force life into her, to coerce a shred of maternal or romantic warmth through starvation and mechanical feeding, a grotesque mimicry of care that only deepened her resolve to die. To him, her death was a defeat. To her, it was the ultimate act of defiance against a man who treated love like a wager and life like a game of chess. Lee-yeon listens, her pulse drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The horror isn't just in the facts, it is in the casual, chilling detachment of the man reciting them. He wanted his brother to inherit this same poison. He wanted Kwon Chae-woo to be shackled to a woman who lied, to experience the same agonizing, slow-motion disintegration that he felt when Yoon Joo-ha chose the grave over his table. He craved a mirror for his own misery, hoping that by dragging Chae-woo into the muck of trauma, he could finally validate the hollow space where his own heart should have been. But as the lightning flashes, illuminating the sharp, predatory angles of Chae-woo's face, Lee-yeon sees the truth. He is not a mastermind of grand passion. He is a man hollowed out by the very obsession he claims is merely duty. He is a coward masquerading as a patriarch, desperate to prove that even a soul as stubborn as Yoon Joo-ha's could be broken if the conditions were just right. The realization hits Lee-yeon with the force of a landslide. The monster hasn't been Chae-woo. Chae-woo was the collateral damage, the audience, and the unintended player in a tragedy written by his own brother. Lee-yeon's resolve hardens. She is a healer, and in this house of rot, she finally understands the nature of the infection. Chae-woo expects her to be broken by this knowledge, to be another casualty of his twisted entertainment. He treats her departure as a final bow, a polite conclusion to his cruel experiment. He bows, he passes, and he leaves her standing in the suffocating silence of the annex, armed with a truth that could shatter the entire Kwon legacy. He failed to realize one vital thing. He views humans as pieces to be moved or discarded, but Lee-yeon looks at the world through the lens of a doctor. She does not see a game, she sees a pathology. And while he spent his life trying to break people into submission, she knows exactly how to mend what has been torn, and more importantly, how to excise the malignancy at the core of this house. The contract ends tomorrow. The doors of this estate are waiting to be opened. But as the rain continues its rhythmic assault on the roof, Lee-yeon realizes she cannot simply walk away. To leave now would be to leave the patient to the poison. And for the first time, she understands that the final move in this game isn't hers. It is the one she is about to force Chae-woo to make. The trap is still set, but the hunter has become the hunted. The rain is no longer a drizzle. It is a deluge, a relentless grey curtain descending upon the Kwon estate to wash away the sins of the past. Lee-yeon stands in the heart of the storm, her phone vibrating against her palm like a dying pulse. When his voice finally breaks through the static, it is not the voice of the man who stalked her through her nightmares, nor the man who whispered apologies in the dark. It is the voice of a man reaching across a 500-year chasm, desperate to bridge the distance between his broken legacy and her fractured reality. She finds him at the edge of the garden, a solitary figure anchored in the mud. He is holding a cello, an instrument of crimson wood that looks like a fresh wound against the monochromatic gloom of the storm. There is a terrifying, fragile beauty to the sight. The man who once used his hands to exert control, to threaten, and to destroy, now uses them to embrace a hollow body of wood and wire. He settles onto a makeshift chair, his posture precise and practiced, but the moment his fingers touch the strings, the air curdles with tension. His hand trembles, a rhythmic, violent shaking that betrays the ghost of the trauma he is trying to exhale. Lee-yeon watches, her breath hitching. She knows the history now. She knows that every note he ever played was a theft of his mother's life, a melody composed of starvation and secrets. She sees the phantom vines, the psychological manacles that Ki-suk had spent a lifetime forging, coiled tight around his wrists. She moves before she can think, a doctor stepping into the center of a surgical theater. She reaches out, her fingers brushing against his skin, clearing away the invisible thorns of his self-doubt. It is a gesture of profound, aching intimacy. She is not just removing the memory of his brother's malice, she is giving him permission to be human again. Under her touch, the shivering stops. The silence of the garden is shattered by the first, deep, resonant vibration of the cello. It is not a polite sound. It is a cry of raw, unfiltered agony. The music erupts, a low, guttural bass that mingles with the thunder, a sound scraped from the very bottom of an abyss. He is not playing for an audience. He is performing an autopsy on his own soul. The melody is the shakon, a piece that holds the weight of centuries, a requiem for everything that has been lost, stolen, or willfully buried. As his fingers dance across the strings, sharp and aggressive, the rain seems to bend around them. He is scraping his past away with the bow, cauterizing the wounds of his upbringing with every note. Lee-yeon stands frozen, caught in the sonic wake of his confession. She realizes then that she was never just a temporary player in this house. She is the witness to his resurrection. But as the final, haunting notes of the shakon bleed into the downpour, a new, cold clarity settles over her. The music has opened the gate, but it has also revealed the true depth of the darkness they are both standing in. The contract is over, the truth is out, and in the silence that follows the music, she realizes that the ending she sought was never the end at all. The rain did not just fall, it acted as a conduit, conducting the electricity of a soul finally being stripped bare. As the cello sang, Lee-yeon watched the man she thought she knew dissolve into someone entirely primal. This was not the heir to a legacy of violence, nor the man who had stalked the corridors of her life with cold, calculated intent. This was a man scraping his own abyss, turning the grotesque scars of his past, the scratching of nails, the hollow hunger of his youth, the crushing weight of his mother's ghost, into a sound that defied reason. The music was a physical assault. It peeled back the layers of her own defenses, rendering her vulnerable to the raw, jagged talent that pulsed through his fingertips. With every note, he didn't just play, he excavated. When he finally collapsed over the crimson instrument, his chest heaving with the violence of his own gasping sobs, the silence that followed was louder than the storm. He was broken, shattered into pieces that only she had the medicine to bind. His confession came then, not as a demand, but as a total surrender. He offered her the world, a future tethered not to the cursed earth of the Kwon estate, but to the sanctuary of her own home. He laid his entire existence at her feet, promising to become the very legacy she had once used as an impenetrable wall. She stood before him, the rain mingling with the salt of his tears on his skin. In that moment of blinding, eerie clarity, she realized that the wall she had built around her heart had been an illusion all along. She hadn't been keeping him out, she had been waiting for him to break through. The umbrella fell to the mud, forgotten. She walked into the wreckage of his sanctuary, a room marred by the frantic, clawed grooves of a boy who had once tried to dig his way out of the dark. Yet, as the storm broke, the light caught those jagged scars on the wall, turning them into something that shimmered like a constellation. She didn't just accept his offer, she claimed it. When she sat upon his lap, she was not just seeking comfort, she was anchoring him to the reality of the living. His embrace was a tremble of disbelief, a desperate, shivering hold that whispered of a man who had finally stopped running from his own shadow. They were two survivors of a war they had both fought and caused, now standing on the threshold of an uncertain, dangerous dawn. She kissed his brow, a silent vow that transcended the contracts and the lies of their history. They would not be buried by the past. They would build their resurrection in the open air, where the soil was fresh and the air was finally, painfully clear. The death knell of the shakon had faded, replaced by the rhythm of a heart she had once tried to abandon. As she held him, this man who had been a demon, a brother, a husband, and a stranger, she knew that their survival was no longer a question of fleeing, but of standing their ground. She would take him to the island, to the quiet, and to the light. And as the last of the storm clouds drifted away, the garden of the Kwon estate remained, haunted and hollowed, as the two of them walked toward a future that demanded everything they had, and offered, for the first time, a chance to truly begin. The final chapter of their nightmare had ended, but the first chapter of their undoing was only just beginning. The rain outside is a rhythmic pulse against the glass, but inside the room, the air has grown thick, heavy with a heat that has nothing to do with the storm. They are two shipwrecked souls washed ashore on the same bed, their skin still slick with the cool remnants of the downpour. When he kisses her, it is an act of reclamation, a desperate, breathless consumption that tastes of salt and rain and the sudden, terrifying realization that they have finally crossed the threshold from shadows into something blindingly real. He is relentless, his movements fueled by an impatience that has been starved for a lifetime. He moves with a hunger that borders on the divine, dismantling her defenses not with force, but with a terrifying, absolute adoration. Yet, in the midst of the chaos, the secret she carries sits between them like a hidden blade. Her hand flinches, covering the soft, secret curve of her stomach, the existence that he, in his obsession, has already managed to uncover. When he drops to his knees and presses his lips to her belly, the world seems to stop. He doesn't need to ask, he knows. And in that moment, the predator who haunted her nightmares vanishes, replaced by a man who looks at her with an intensity that is more daunting than any threat. He is not just staking a claim on her, he is binding his very name to hers, a radical, almost absurd declaration of surrender. He speaks of changing his lineage, of grafting himself onto her identity, his pride discarded at the altar of his devotion. It is a bizarre, deeply human display of madness. He negotiates their future like a man betting his soul on a single hand of cards. He traces promises against her skin with his lips, leaving marks that are more than bruises. They are seals, ironclad oaths of a father and a lover who is terrified of being left behind. He is the storm that has finally decided to settle, turning his wreckage into a foundation. Lee-yeon watches him, the frantic beating of her own heart echoing the rhythm of his obsession. She realizes that the man who once played the cello to mourn the dead is now playing a melody for the living. The darkness of the Kwon estate, with its history of starvation and betrayal, seems to recede, pushed back by the sheer, stubborn audacity of his love. She finds herself teasing him, the questions tumbling out like a nervous defense mechanism, demanding to know of his past, his time abroad, the invisible lovers who might have come before her. It is an arrogant, fragile attempt to reclaim control, to treat this monumental shift as if it were nothing more than a casual inquiry. But as she looks into eyes that are fierce, tear-stained, and utterly transparent, she knows the truth. The wall between them is gone. The secret of the mother's death, the legacy of the spirit tree, the shadow of the brother, they all feel like echoes of a life they have already outlived. She doesn't know where the next dawn will take them, or if the ghosts of the Kwon family will allow them to leave unscathed. But as he presses his forehead against hers, promising a life built on nothing but the depth of his devotion, she realizes she has stopped holding her breath. She has chosen to be the light in his galaxy of scars. And for the first time, the future doesn't look like a contract. It looks like a life. The air in the room was thick with the scent of spent passion and the lingering, metallic tang of the storm that had battered the glass. They were tangled together, limbs woven in a desperate, quiet architecture, but the silence between them was no longer filled with mystery. It was filled with the brutal honesty of who he really was. Lee-yeon had finally unmasked him. The man who had once been a stranger, then a monster, and finally a lover, sat before her with a vulnerability that was almost painful to behold. He did not deny the darkness of his occupation. He spoke of the Kwon family not as a legacy, but as a crime scene he was permanently embedded in. His days were spent in the shadows of power, executing tasks that could never be written down, funded by secrets, and fueled by a violence that had defined his adult life. To hear him admit this, to watch the shame play across his features, was a far sharper blade than any threat he had ever leveled against her. He was a creature of the hunt, a man trained to tear down, and yet he looked at her as if she were the only thing in the world worth preserving. There was a strange, dark humor to the way he navigated his own obsession. He was 28, a man standing on the precipice of his own history, and yet he acted with the reckless, unhinged devotion of a teenager. He wanted to raise their child, he wanted to merge his identity into hers, he wanted to be the last, most significant thing she ever needed. When he spoke of changing his own name, of becoming Kwon Chae-woo just to be tethered to her, it was a gesture so bizarrely possessive and yet so deeply earnest that it left Lee-yeon breathless. He was ready to burn down his own name to take hers. But the reality of their situation was a cold, encroaching tide. The morning arrived with a grey, unforgiving light. The suitcase, once a symbol of her imprisonment, now rolled calmly across the pavement, pulled by the same hand that had once held hers in fear and control. He was leaving her, or rather, he was letting her go, and the tension in his grip told the true story. He was a man who wanted to be anywhere but where he was, yet he remained, anchored by the necessity of the coming night. Lee-yeon watched him, her mind racing. She knew the peace they had found was a fragile, temporary thing. She was heading toward the sanctuary of Hwaido, but he was staying behind in the heart of the beast. He reassured her with a smile that was dangerously sweet, a mask that didn't quite reach the predatory focus in his eyes. He promised her that he would follow, that he was done with the family, that he was theirs now. But she knew that smile. She knew the darkness that lingered beneath his composure. Tonight, the Kwon estate would undergo a transformation, a shift in the hierarchy that would be neither quiet nor clean. He was not just letting her go, he was clearing the path. He needed to dismantle the family from the inside out, and he couldn't do that with her in the line of fire. As she walked away, every step felt like a betrayal, yet every step was also an act of faith. He would pursue her. She didn't doubt that for a second. Even if the ground beneath him crumbled, he would find his way to her side. But as she looked back one last time, seeing him stand alone against the backdrop of that suffocating mansion, she realized that the man she was falling in love with wasn't just a broken boy trying to heal. He was an architect of destruction, and the house he was preparing to tear down was his own. The stage is set. The heir is ready to burn the kingdom to the ground. And in the distance, the island of Hwaido waits, unaware that it is about to receive a guest who brings the fire with him. The departure from the Kwon estate feels like a heist, though the only things being stolen are the future and a young boy who has learned the sharp, metallic taste of ambition. Ju-baek, once a prisoner of silence, now carries himself with the misplaced arrogance of a small king, his luggage a testament to the life he intends to command. He is the product of this house, polished, clever, and terrifyingly pragmatic. Even as Kwon Chae-woo ruffles the boy's hair, there is a dangerous undercurrent in their exchange. It is a pact sealed in the shadow of a changing empire, a transaction of loyalty that only two people hardened by this family could truly understand. But beneath the mundane chaos of packing, the atmosphere is heavy with a sudden, aching sweetness. Chae-woo, the man who was once a hunter in the tall grass of his own family's malice, is now a man standing in the light. His confession regarding the pregnancy is not just an acknowledgement, it is a vow. He is weary of the bloodlines that define them, the ancient, rotting roots of the Kwon tree that demand tribute in misery. He wants a new beginning, a clean slate for a child he hopes will inherit Lee-yeon's grace rather than his own dark inheritance. As the sedan pulls away, the mansion recedes, its cold stone and history blurring into a memory. The journey to the harbor is a transition between worlds, a shift from the suffocating presence of Chae-woo to the open expanse of the sea. For a moment, the world feels expansive, hopeful. Then, the world breaks. The transition from the salt-sprayed deck of the ferry to the absolute, Suffocating darkness of the cell is not a blur, it is a violent severance. There is no memory of the arrival, no record of the descent. There is only the crushing silence of a concrete tomb and the bite of stagnant, freezing air. Lee-yeon wakes in the dark, her senses reeling. The walls are hard, unyielding grey, and the space is a claustrophobic box that smells of dust and long-abandoned hope. Her pocket is empty, her tether to the outside, to the man who promised to follow her, is gone. Panic, sharp and electric, lances through her chest, but it is silenced by a frantic pounding from the other side of the wall. The voice that tears through the silence is a ghost from her past. Hwang Jo-yoon. He is here. They are both here. The Hwaido she had longed for, the sanctuary where she planned to plant the seeds of her new life, has transformed into a prison. The irony is as cruel as it is precise. They haven't escaped the reach of the Kwon family. They have been delivered to the deepest, darkest vault of the island itself. The realization settles over her with the weight of a burial. The sanctuary was a lure. The path she walked was not toward freedom, but toward the origin of a trap she never saw being laid. As she presses her palm against the freezing cement, she realizes the question isn't how she got here, or who put her in this box. It is whether or not the man she left behind is the one who holds the key, or the one who turned the lock. The air in the concrete box is stagnant, tasting of lime, dust, and the stale, desperate sweat of men who have forgotten the sun. Lee-yeon's head throbs with the dull, rhythmic ache of a concussion, but the internal alarm ringing in her mind is far more violent. She is a woman of science, a tree doctor who understands the delicate, interconnected beauty of life. To find herself interred within the very soil she was meant to preserve, to realize that the paradise she helped curate is built upon a literal foundation of rot, is a psychological fracturing she is barely holding together. Across the wall, Hwang Jo-yoon's voice is a jagged wire. He is a man who has been hollowed out by months of confinement, his laughter teetering on the edge of a breakdown. As he unravels the truth, Lee-yeon's mind, usually so structured, so clinical, begins to hemorrhage connections. The sprawling, lush botanical majesty of Hwaido was never a garden. It was a front. A sprawling, verdant mask for a pharmaceutical nightmare. The name summer hits her like an injection of venom. She remembers the whispers of rare, mind-altering extracts, the proprietary synthetic breakthroughs of Suguk pharmaceuticals. But the truth is far more gruesome than simple chemistry. As Jo-yoon's voice breaks against the stone, the horrific, biological cycle of the estate is laid bare. They are not just captives, they are the compost. The rare plants, the ones that promise health and synthetic salvation, thrive on the most morbid of diets. They are fed on the humanity that the Kwon family so casually discards. Meanwhile, miles away, the Kwon estate is experiencing a different kind of harvest. Kwon Chae-woo moves through the mansion with the lethal, silent grace of an apex predator returning to his den. The hallways, once pristine, are now canvases of arterial spray. He does not stumble. He does not hesitate. Every step he takes is a heavy, rhythmic percussion of violence that stains the hardwood beneath his feet. He is no longer the man who played the cello in the rain. He is the man who has finally accepted the blade he was born to wield. Kwon Hee-joon stands in the shadows, a witness to the carnage, watching his brother dismantle the family hierarchy with clinical, terrifying efficiency. He knows what Chae-woo is searching for. He knows that the trail of bodies is leading to the underground, the same suffocating vault where Yoon Ju-ha once withered away, the same dark architecture that now holds Lee-yeon. Chae-woo's face is a porcelain mask of ice. He is indifferent to the history of the house, indifferent to the crippled parents left in the wake of Kisuk's ascent, and indifferent to his brother's dark curiosity. He is driven by a singular, focused kinetic energy. He is moving toward the epicenter of the Kwon family's original sin, toward the place where the line between power and putrefaction is drawn in concrete. He is not seeking redemption. He is seeking the architect of his misery. And as he approaches the final threshold, his grip on his weapon tightens, his pulse steady and cold. The garden is blooming, and it is hungry. In the depths of the island, Lee-yeon is beginning to realize that the man who promised to follow her is the very reason she is buried alive. The stage is set for a collision between the hunter and the buried. And beneath the surface, the plants are waiting to be fed. The descent into the Kwon family basement is not a journey into a cellar, but a descent into an anatomical heart of darkness. The iron stairs groan underfoot, a rhythmic, metallic protest that echoes the decay of the lineage itself. Down here, the air is not just stale, it is thick with the cloying, sickly-sweet perfume of summer, the pharmaceutical lifeblood of their empire, a drug that peels back the layers of reality until only the most jagged, raw desires remain. Kwon Chae-woo sits at an ivory dressing table that looks like a relic from a funeral parlor. He is relaxed, almost spectral, his movements fluid with the chemical intoxication that has replaced his soul. He is the architect of starvation, the man who turned his own mother into a ghost, and he wears his madness like a tailored suit. Kwon Chae-woo enters, and the room seems to shrink, the silence vibrating with the suppressed kinetic energy of his fury. He does not offer a grand speech. He does not offer mercy. He simply acts. The blade comes out with the cold, deliberate precision of a surgeon who has stopped trying to heal and has begun to dissect. There is no room for anesthesia in this reckoning. Chae-woo is precise, methodical, and profoundly cruel. He works with a dull blade, turning the act of severance into a grueling, protracted performance. The dressing table trembles, a testament to the agony vibrating through the room, while the sharp, alcoholic sting of disinfectant cuts through the heavy scent of the drugs. It is not just about the inheritance papers or the physical toll. It is about the visceral, rotting debt of a lifetime. Every strike of Chae-woo's fist is a heartbeat of retribution for the woman who once withered away in the dark, waiting for a melody that never came. He has listened to the recordings, heard the way his brother toyed with the life of the woman he claimed to love, and the realization has shattered him. He had been a sacrifice, a pawn in a game played with his own mother's starvation, and he is now burning the board. Kwon Chae-woo, eyes dilated and mind floating in the chemical ether, offers no real defense. He is consumed by a possessive, corrosive jealousy that transcends life and death. He murmurs about victory, about the inevitability of loss, his words slipping into the disjointed, terrifying logic of the damned. He mocks the very idea of meeting his obsession in the afterlife, a delusion so profound it makes the violence look almost gentle by comparison. Chae-woo stares into those wide, vacant pupils and finds nothing but a void. He refuses to give his brother the release of a quick end. He chooses instead to seal him in the very rot he created, leaving him to the silence and the starvation, to the slow, agonizing erosion of an empty shell that has forgotten how to be human. The room is a ruin, a microcosm of the entire Kwon dynasty, blood-splattered, hollow, and utterly, irrevocably lost. Chae-woo turns to leave, his rugged breath hitching in the damp air, leaving the architect of his misery to a cage of his own making. But as he climbs back toward the surface, the chill in his neck remains. The brother's words, the haunting, disjointed prophecy that he, the hunter, would ultimately be the hand that kills the one he loves, follow him like a shadow. The estate is falling. The harvest of sin is complete. And yet, as Chae-woo steps back into the world, he is gripped by a sudden, freezing terror. He has destroyed the monster, but he has not yet escaped the curse. The descent into the cellar is complete, but the silence that follows is not the peace of a finished war. It is the hollow, ringing silence of a trap snapping shut. Kwon Chae-woo is gone, submerged into the watery grave of his own madness, his final, twisted laughter lingering in the damp air like a stain. Yet, the victory feels like ash in the mouth. As Chae-woo emerges from the subterranean darkness, the world has shifted. The sky has bruised into a deep, unforgiving charcoal, and the oxygen in the air feels thin, as if the earth itself is suffocating under the weight of their sins. Then, the static breaks. The news from the surface is a jagged blade to the heart. The ferry is a ghost ship, a carefully orchestrated blackout where the tracks have been scrubbed clean. Lee-yeon has been vanished into the vast, indifferent maw of the ocean. Chae-woo stands amidst the ruin of his family home, his hands still slick with the crimson evidence of his retribution, and for the first time, he feels the true anatomy of his own despair. The hunting dogs, the loyal, shadowed extensions of the Kwon legacy, have been erased. He is left with nothing but the cold, digital pulse of a tracking chip blinking mockingly in the middle of a black, empty sea. He begins to move, but the gait is no longer that of a predator hunting prey. It is the frantic, uncoordinated stride of a man trying to outrun his own shadow. The prophecy of his brother's madness, the poisonous idea that he, the hunter, is the very instrument of her destruction, begins to coil around his throat like a phantom vine. If he loses her, he is not just alone. He is unmade. He is a husk, a useless, dragging weight that has been denied the one light that allowed him to breathe. He realizes then, with a crushing, absolute clarity, that his love was perhaps just another flavor of his family's greed, a possessive, selfish demand to be completed by another. He had tried to play at being a man, a husband, a father, but he was always the hunting dog, and he has led the wolf straight to the sheep. The sound of a propeller cuts through the night, a distant, mechanical scream, but it offers no solace. Chae-woo's pulse is erratic, his breath burning like acid. He looks at his hands, the hands that broke his brother, the hands that touched her face, the hands that have now paved the road to her disappearance. He is prepared to sacrifice everything, his pride, his name, his agency, if only to see her breathe again. He would be her servant, her shadow, her nothing, if it meant she could exist in a world where he was not the one bringing the darkness. He turns to Hee-jun, his voice stripped of all its predatory edge, replaced by a raw, jagged edge of desperation. The hunt is no longer about power. It is about a frantic, agonizing search for a ghost. Lee-yeon is somewhere beneath the earth, somewhere beneath the waves, a secret hidden in the vault of an island that serves only to feed on the broken. As the night deepens, the man who wanted to be a guardian realizes that he has only succeeded in becoming the architect of his own hollow tomb. The ocean is vast, the secrets are deep, and the clock is ticking against a life that he would burn the entire world down to save. He stands in the dark, a king of ruins, waiting for a sign that she is still alive, or for the moment he realizes that his own shadows have finally swallowed her whole. The air in the depths of Hwaido does not smell of flowers or earth. It smells of copper, antiseptic, and the sour, suffocating stench of human despair. Each step Lee-yeon takes is measured in the rhythmic clanging of iron, a brutal percussion echoing down a hallway of concrete tombs. Behind those doors lie broken things, souls withered into husks by the very machines they were meant to operate. The reality is far more clinical, and far more monstrous, than she ever imagined. They are not just harvesting plants, they are farming the adrenal secretions of the terrified, extracting the very essence of human agony to force a bloom that should never exist. She is a prisoner in a whitewashed slaughterhouse, a place where the floor is slick with the red residue of the day's harvest. Every guard is a ghost in a protective suit, and every room is a laboratory for refined cruelty. When she bites the arm of her captor, it is not an act of tactical escape, but a desperate, animalistic defiance, a futile strike against a system that treats human life as mere compost. Then, the narrative shifts on a knife's edge. A voice cuts through the tension. Kwon Chae-woo, the director of the project, a man whose hands are stained with the invisible ink of a dozen disappearances. He pulls her into the relative stillness of an office, his face a mask of weary, paternal irritation. He is a man trapped by his own brilliance, protecting his favorite student from the very furnace he helped build. The moral chasm between them is vast. Lee-yeon, trembling, frantic, demands justice, demands the liberation of the boy, demands the end of a nightmare that has swallowed her sanity. She stands on the precipice of a moral crusade, fueled by the memory of a man who promised to hunt down the world to find her. But Kwon Chae-woo is a realist in a house of horrors. He dismisses her ethics as the naivety of a gardener, his gaze hard, his secrets held behind a fortress of professional arrogance. She is out of place here, a woman who heals trees, forced to witness a garden grown from graves. The atmosphere shifts when she reaches for the pocket of the unfamiliar gown he has forced upon her. Her fingers brush against something cold, heavy, and metallic. A lighter. It is a small, mundane object, yet in this cathedral of synthetic chemicals and volatile gases, it feels like a live grenade. The professor's warning, his desperate, rough push to get her out, clashes with the weight of the metal in her hand. She looks at him, searching for the man who once taught her the language of roots and leaves, but all she sees is the shadow of a collaborator. The silence that stretches between them is no longer expectant. It is lethal. She realizes she cannot leave. The boy is somewhere in that concrete maze, and the man who promised to tear down the world for her is surely somewhere in the dark, carving a path toward this very room. She grips the lighter. The flick of a thumb could turn this entire antiseptic nightmare into a pyre. Her eyes harden, the initial terror replaced by a chilling, quiet resolve. If the garden must bloom on blood, then it will finish by feeding on fire. The professor turns his back, believing he has saved her. He doesn't know that he hasn't just given a student a chance to escape, he has handed her the match. The air is thick with the scent of accelerant and the hum of the ventilation system. Somewhere, in the bowels of the island, a hunter is closing in. And she is ready to burn the whole orchard to the ground. The air inside the facility is a suffocating cocktail of sterile ozone and the heavy, cloying rot of unnatural growth. Lee-yeon stands frozen, the lighter, a heavy, cold weight of potential destruction, clutched in her palm. Through the observation window, the Hwaido gardens stretch out like a manicured lie, a vibrant, lush paradise designed to drape a velvet shroud over the charnel house beneath. It is a masterpiece of deception. The surface celebrates life, while the roots gorge themselves on the agony of the disappeared. She is a tree doctor. Her entire existence has been a prayer to the sanctity of life, a reverence for the silent, patient growth of the forest. To ignite these trees would be a spiritual suicide, a shattering of the very core that has held her together against the brutality of the Kwon family. Yet, as she watches the rhythmic, pulsing glow of the black flowers, plants that feed not on sunlight but on the violent chemistry of human terror, the moral geometry of her world collapses. Nature is not the culprit here. It is the canvas for a monster's ambition. Kwon Chae-woo is a man fraying at the edges, his urgency a frantic dance on the edge of a blade. He presses her toward the exit, his eyes darting toward the security feed, where the red, unblinking eye of a camera watches them like a predator in the dark. He offers her the exit, the white gown, the camouflage of a scientist, but the path he maps leads away from the only thing that matters, the boy. Lee-yeon's focus shifts, the frantic static of her panic crystallizing into a single, piercing clarity. She remembers the way the car tires burned into the pavement, the way Chae-woo looked at her not as a trophy, but as a destination. She stops fighting the past and starts trusting the man who has spent every waking hour chasing her ghost. Her trembling subsides. The lighter disappears into her palm, a hidden spark in a room of gas. She follows Kwon Chae-woo, moving through the labyrinthine corridors like a shadow among the damned. The facility is a sensory nightmare, the smell of synthetic fertilizer that coats the back of the throat, the discordant symphony of mechanical hums and human pleas, and the sight of the black flowers, swaying in their tanks as if they are breathing. Then, the world tilts. Through a gap in the blinds of a containment room, her gaze locks with a man, a guard, a torturer, a nameless cog in the machine. And beneath that gaze, she sees it, a body strapped to a chair, a skeletal figure caught in the cruel gears of the extraction process. The sight hits her with the force of a physical blow, a visceral reminder that she is walking through a slaughterhouse. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't scream. The woman who once trembled at the thought of a broken branch now stares into the abyss of human cruelty and realizes that there is no room left for mercy. She is not just a witness anymore. She is an anomaly in their system. As they navigate the halls, the red light of the surveillance camera pulses like a warning. The facility knows something is wrong. The ground beneath them is beginning to vibrate with the approach of something, perhaps a rescue, perhaps a purge. Lee-yeon's thumb brushes the edge of the lighter. She is no longer just a doctor of trees. She is a woman holding a spark, and the entire kingdom of rot is built on wood that is ready to burn. The exit is just ahead, but the boy is still lost in the dark. And in the silence of the corridor, the first sound of breaking glass echoes. The hunt has reached the island. The air in the stairwell is thin and metallic, vibrating with the frantic pulse of a woman walking through the jaws of a beast. Lee-yeon's ascent is not a flight toward freedom, but a desperate scramble through the throat of the island itself. Every floor she clears is a milestone of dread. The red, unblinking eyes of the surveillance cameras follow her movement, tracing the line of her spine like a sniper's laser. When she breaks the surface, the transition is jarring. The cool, verdant scent of the Hwaido garden, usually a sanctuary of life, now carries the cloying, sickly sweet perfume of the black flowers. It is a fake paradise, a stage set for a massacre. The relief of the open air is immediately crushed by the shadow of the hunters. They move with the synchronized, soulless efficiency of men who have forgotten what it means to be human, the private security of a dynasty that treats life like a ledger entry. Then, the true horror strikes from within. A sharp, searing cramp tears through her abdomen, a physical manifestation of the stress her body can no longer contain. She feels the warmth, a spreading, visceral dampness that turns her blood to ice. The agony is not just a warning. It is a betrayal of the life she is trying to protect. She is a woman on the edge of a precipice, clutching a lifeline that has been snatched from her grasp. The phone, that fragile electronic tether to the only man who knows how to burn this place down, skitters across the underbrush, discarded like trash. As the men in black close in, their faces are cold, professional, and terrifyingly blank. When she screams, they do not hesitate. They silence her with the practiced clinical detachment of those who have seen too many lives end in these shadows. The gag is not just a tool to keep her quiet, it is a cage for her defiance. But beneath the suffocating cloth, Lee-yeon's eyes are wide, burning, and lethal. She is memorizing them. She is committing the anatomy of her captors to memory, an act of psychological vengeance that will outlast their temporary control. She recognizes one of them. A face from the Kwon family's inner circle, a ghost from the mansion she once called a prison. She locks eyes with him, her gaze so intense, so brimming with the promise of the inferno she is ready to ignite, that even the hard-hearted assassin pauses. He presses a finger to his lips, a chilling, mocking gesture of silence. But then, the world fractures. The glass dome above them, the symbol of their curated, captive heaven, explodes. The sound is not a crash, it is the roar of an arriving storm. Amidst the screaming shards of glass and the sudden, violent rush of wind, a sound pierces the chaos. It is the rhythmic, haunting melody of a ringtone, a song she knows, a sound that belongs to the man who promised he would follow. Kwon Chae-woo has arrived. And he has not come to garden. The hunters turn their heads toward the breach in the sky, their confidence faltering as the melody cuts through the silence of the facility. Lee-yeon slumps against the cold, artificial earth, her vision blurring at the edges, but her ears are sharp, hungry for the sound of his approach. The dome is broken, the secret is exposed, and the hunter has finally stepped into the trap he helped build. The final movement of the concert has begun. The dome above Hwaido shatters, a jagged geometry of falling glass and splintering light that rains down like a violent, transparent hail. Amidst the chaos, the air is thick with the scent of ozone and the sharp, metallic tang of blood. The men in black, those soulless instruments of a dying empire, are being systematically dismantled by a force that carries the same cold, lethal pedigree as they do. It is a war of shadows, a brutal, synchronized erasure of the very tools they used to build their nightmare. Then, through the swirling dust and the dying light, he appears. Kwon Chae-woo does not walk, he tears through the debris like a man reclaiming a fragment of his own soul. His mask is stripped away, revealing a face fractured by a devastation so profound it seems to pull the very gravity from the room. When he gathers Lee-yeon into his arms, his touch is not that of a hunter, but of a man who has finally found the anchor that keeps him from drifting into the abyss. He is trembling, a shuddering, broken vibration that rattles his entire frame. The man who wielded violence as a language now speaks only in the ragged, shallow gasps of a man staring into the void of his own failure. He holds her as if she were made of spun glass, as if a single breath might shatter what is left of them both. The hospital room later is a stark, sterile antithesis to the madness of the garden. The air is thin, smelling of antiseptic and the ghostly, lingering trace of alcohol. Lee-yeon wakes to the sound of her own ragged breathing, her hands instinctively shielding her stomach. The fear, the cold, creeping dread that she had lost the flicker of life within her, clings to her like a shroud. But the words of the child, Ju-baek, are the first soft rain on a parched land. The baby is safe. The relief is so total, so overwhelming, that it leaves her gasping, as if she has just surfaced from a long, drowning sleep. Ju-baek sits at her bedside, his small face etched with a maturity that no child should ever possess. He is the quiet witness to their devastation, a boy who learned to swim in a sea of monsters and kept his secrets in the dark. He speaks of the sea, of the desperate, frantic struggle to keep his head above the waves. But when Lee-yeon asks for the one face her heart is screaming for, the silence he provides is heavier than the stone walls of the island. Kwon Chae-woo is gone. He saved her from the wreckage, he pulled her from the jaws of the machine, but in the aftermath, he has retreated into the shadows. He is a man who saw the monster he could become, a man who realized that his love was a furnace, not a shelter. He left her with the safety of the dawn, but he did not stay to see the sun rise. Lee-yeon stares at the empty space beside her bed, the ghost of his presence still haunting the sterile air. The garden is burning, the empire is collapsing, and the hunt has come to an end. But as she traces the faint, lingering imprint of a lighter against her palm, she realizes the truth. He didn't just save her. He surrendered himself to the darkness so she could live in the light. And somewhere, out in the vast, indifferent world, the hunter is waiting, not for her, but for the final reckoning he knows he must face alone. The hospital room is a cavern of shadows, thick with the scent of sterile gauze and the lingering, metallic tang of the night's trauma. Lee-yeon exists in the spaces between consciousness, drifting through a reality that feels more like a fever dream. Every time she reaches out for the man who pulled her from the fire, the bed is cold, save for the phantom warmth of a lingering touch, a thumb grazing her brow, the weight of a kiss upon her hand. It is a presence that feels both like a sanctuary and a ghost. Then, the darkness shifts. He is there, anchored to the bedside, his silhouette carved from the gloom. When the light reveals him, the facade of the hero vanishes. Kwon Chae-woo does not look like a man who has won, he looks like a man who has been hollowed out. His movements are sharp, jagged, and entirely devoid of the poise she once feared. As the windows are thrown open to the bruised night sky, The distant, flickering crimson of the burning island paints his features in the colors of hell. The air that rushes in is cool, yet it carries the heat of a ruined empire. He gestures toward the burning horizon, his eyes burning with a desperate, self-destructive intensity. He is not mourning the loss of the estate, he is mourning the fragility of a life that almost vanished. His resentment pours out, a cold, crystalline stream of confession. He speaks of the terror of the void, of the realization that he was replaceable in her eyes, that he was merely a shadow she was ready to abandon if the world burned. He articulates the jealousy that has been eating him from the inside, the humiliating, agonizing realization that the life they created was cherished, while he, the protector, was viewed through a lens of fear and suspicion. He is trembling, not with anger, but with the shame of his own vulnerability. He is a hunter who has realized his prey is the only thing that keeps his heart beating, and the thought of being left behind has turned his devotion into a volatile, suffocating obsession. Lee-yeon watches him, the breath caught in her throat. She sees the cracks in the porcelain mask, the raw, bleeding edges of a man who has sacrificed his own soul to keep her alive. She wants to reach out, to soothe the tempest in his eyes, but the distance between them feels like a canyon forged from years of trauma and blood. He approaches her, the grace of his movement replaced by a stiff, mechanical precision. He produces a document, the paper crisp and stark in the dim room, a contrast to the chaos outside. He does not offer a gentle request, he offers a mandate. The question hangs in the heavy air, suspended between the flickering light of the fire and the cold reality of the room. She stares at the paper, then up at the man who looks as though he might shatter at a single whisper. The air is so quiet now that she can hear the pulse of her own heart, and the distant, dying roar of the island that tried to consume them both. Sign. The word is not a request. It is the beginning of a new, and perhaps even more terrifying, cage. The hospital room is stifling, a claustrophobic box where the air is thick with the scent of antiseptic and the dying embers of a world that no longer exists. On the bed, Lee-yeon stares at the document Kwon Chae-woo has placed before her, a marriage registration. It is not a request, it is a contract of survival, a tether forged from the wreckage of their shared nightmare. The irony is sharp enough to draw blood. She has been a puppet before, her life signed away by the hands of others, but this paper feels different. It is an anchor, heavy and cold, meant to chain them together in the wake of the fire. Chae-woo is no longer the man who apologized for his existence. The humility has been burned away, replaced by something far more dangerous, far more possessive. He sits at her bedside, his hand on his own throat, inviting her to feel the frantic, rhythmic thrum of his pulse beneath her skin. He is a man who has looked into the abyss and realized that he would rather drag her into the darkness with him than watch her exist in a world where he cannot touch her. The lighter mark on her palm, a physical scar of their trauma, serves as the catalyst for his transformation. He has stopped trying to be the hero. Instead, he is choosing to be the architect of her sanctuary, a builder who understands that the only way to keep the wolves at bay is to become the monster that patrols the perimeter. When he speaks, the words are growl, a desperate admission of a love so feral it borders on hate. He is jealous of her autonomy, terrified of the space between them, and utterly convinced that if he does not bind her to him, the world will find a way to swallow her whole. Lee-yeon watches him, the sirens wailing outside like the funeral dirge for their old lives. She sees the thorns in his eyes, the absolute, terrifying desperation of a man who has equated his own life with her breath. She could fear him. She could remember the cages of her past. But as she looks at the man who walked into an inferno for her, the walls she has built around her own heart begin to buckle. She does not give him the defiance he expects. Instead, she offers the truth, a soft, quiet admission that cuts deeper than any blade. She does not reach for the pen to escape him, she reaches for the pen to anchor them both. Outside, the news cycle has already begun its predatory spin. The Hwaido is now a story for the history books, a botanical garden turned charnel house, a scandal that will consume the nation. The Suguk pharmaceutical empire is beginning to bleed out in the public eye, its secrets dragged into the harsh, unflattering light of mourning. But inside the room, the world has narrowed down to two people. As Lee-yeon leans forward, her hand steady despite the tremors of the long night, she realizes that this marriage is not just a legal formality. It is a bunker. It is the beginning of a life built on the ashes of everything they were forced to destroy. The ink touches the paper, a dark, permanent stain that seals their fate. The hunter and the survivor, tied together by a contract written in the heat of a burning island, preparing to face a world that will never be the same. The fire has died down, but the smoke is still rising, and somewhere in the distance, the first siren of a new, inevitable threat begins to wail. The world outside the hospital window is a fractured mirror of the nightmare they barely survived. News anchors breathlessly recount the death of the Hwaido, their voices thin and clinical as they broadcast the dismantling of a dynasty built on human agony. Every headline is a jagged shard: Suguk pharmaceutical, the hallucinogen, the torture, the missing scion of the Kwon house. It is the sound of an empire collapsing under the weight of its own rot, yet inside this room, the air is thick with a different, more suffocating tension. Lee-yeon watches the muted flicker of the television, her mind a tangled web of survivors' guilt and exhaustion. Beside her, Kwon Chae-woo is a study in chilling contrast. He is the storm that has passed, yet his calm is more unnerving than the fire he started. He feeds her with the delicate precision of a lover, his fingers lingering against her skin with a possessive heat that makes her pulse stutter. He is a predator who has decided to play the role of the devoted guardian, a mask that slips only when he looks at the legal documents he persists in placing before her. He is not afraid of the chaos outside. He is not afraid of the collapse of his own family name, nor the wreckage left by his brother's disappearance. His only obsession is the piece of paper that will bind their lives into a single, legal entity. When Lee-yeon challenges him, her voice a fragile protest against his relentless focus, he smiles, a look that doesn't reach the dark, calculating depths of his eyes. He is a man who knows how to burn down a forest to save a single tree, and he is currently in the process of pruning everything that doesn't serve his singular, narrow vision of their future. He traces the line of her throat with a touch that feels like a promise and a threat, his breath a warm, erratic current against her skin. He talks of murder and management as easily as he talks of raising their child, a dark, casual humor that marks him as someone who has long since abandoned the moral constraints of the world. He is not a man who seeks redemption, he is a man who seeks ownership. Lee-yeon realizes, with a mounting sense of vertigo, that she is not just being wooed, she is being claimed. The legal bond he demands is not for her security, it is a fence for his own peace of mind. He knows that his love is a volatile, dangerous thing, and he wants the law to provide the cage he cannot maintain on his own. As he pulls her closer, his embrace is a crushing weight, a reminder that she is held by a man who has mastered the art of disposing of the dead and protecting the living with equal, brutal efficiency. She looks at him, searching for the man who saved her from the fire, but all she sees is the shadow of a hunter who has finally cornered his greatest prize. Outside, the sirens continue their rhythmic wail, a background hum to the quiet, domestic violence of his affection. She hesitates, the weight of the document pressing down on the nightstand like a tombstone, while his gaze sharpens, waiting for her surrender. The question is no longer whether they will marry, but how much of her soul he will demand in exchange for his protection. The silence that follows his last words is not peace. It is the held breath of a trap waiting to snap shut. The hospital room door swung open with a violence that echoed the chaos of the outside world, admitting a whirlwind in the form of Kwon Chae-woo. She arrived not as a visitor, but as a force of nature, her eyes darting between Lee-yeon and the man who, only a month prior, had been a phantom in a dying garden. The transformation was too sudden, too jagged, and to Kwon Chae-woo, it was an offense that demanded immediate, vocal retaliation. She descended upon them like a summer storm. Her words were not spoken, they were hurled, a volcanic eruption of protective fury aimed squarely at the man who had dared to return. She clawed at the air, reliving the agony of Lee-yeon's near-death, the days of listless, frozen grief that had hollowed out their world. Every strike she landed on Kwon Chae-woo's shoulders was a physical manifestation of a debt he could never fully repay. Chae-woo stood his ground. He was a man who had faced down fire and betrayal, yet here he accepted the blows with a stoic, almost terrifying silence. He did not defend himself. He did not pull away. He simply bowed his head, his posture shifting into a mask of calculated contrition that felt as sharp as a blade. When he finally spoke, he did not apologize in the way she expected. He began to bargain. The room grew dense with a sudden, suffocating tension. With a voice as smooth as polished glass, Chae-woo began to dismantle Kwon Chae-woo's defenses. He spoke of wealth, of power, of the vast, unseen machinery of his family's empire. He dangled the promise of a life rewritten, of talent unburdened by domestic drudgery, a pitch so seductive and meticulously crafted that it turned the fire in Kwon Chae-woo's eyes into a flicker of bewildered curiosity. He wasn't just managing an in-law, he was neutralizing a threat with the same surgical precision he used to handle a corpse. It was a performance of breathtaking ruthlessness. When he finally stepped out, leaving the room in a state of stunned, shifting quiet, Kwon Chae-woo's transition was almost jarring. The fury had vanished, replaced by a glint of mischievous, knowing satisfaction. She leaned in, her gaze softening as she brushed a stray hair from Lee-yeon's forehead. The tension that had held Lee-yeon captive began to dissipate, replaced by the realization that in this strange, violent dance, they had both played their parts to perfection. Kwon Chae-woo's laughter was dry, a sound of history and wisdom clashing. She didn't offer lectures, she offered a mirror. She reminded Lee-yeon that love, in their world, was rarely a clean, polite thing. It was a messy, loud, and sometimes pathetic affair, a desperate clinging to a face that remained beautiful even when the world around it was being torn apart. Lee-yeon sat in the silence that followed, the weight of the marriage contract momentarily lifted. Outside, the world was still mourning the Hwaido, but in the quiet of the room, she looked at her own hands and felt the steady, grounded pulse of her own survival. The hunter had come back, the mother-in-law had been placated, and the future, that golden, dangerous thing, was finally theirs to shape. The air felt different now. The scent of antiseptic remained, but beneath it, there was the faint, lingering smell of smoke and the promise of a life that would never be quiet again. She realized then that they weren't just reconciling. They were starting a war together, and for the first time, she wasn't the one being hunted. The door remained closed, but the shadow of the man who had just left still lingered on the floor, waiting. The front door swings open, and for the first time in 40 days, the house breathes. It is a quiet, domestic sanctity. The floors are swept, the air is still, and the lingering dread of the island has been scrubbed away by Kwon Chae-woo's vigilant hand. Yet, the man standing behind Lee-yeon is a storm that refuses to settle. Kwon Chae-woo is a study in restless agitation. The marriage certificate sits on the side table like a silent indictment, its edges crisp and mocking. He stares at it with the intensity of a man deciding whether to burn a bridge or build a fortress. His hands are never still. He carves fruit with a blade that moves too quickly, his eyes darting to Lee-yeon with a hunger that has nothing to do with food and everything to do with ownership. He is a man adrift in his own insecurities, haunted by the terrifying realization that his child is not the only thing keeping Lee-yeon tethered to him. He does not want the child to be their only common ground. He wants her pulse, her obsession, her total, undivided surrender. When he finally bridges the distance between them, he does not ask, he consumes. His kiss is a reclamation. It is the slow, deliberate exploration of a territory he fears losing. He moves with a rhythm that is simultaneously submissive and predatory, a desperate clashing of tongues and teeth that leaves Lee-yeon breathless and reeling. There is a raw, jagged edge to his touch. He marks her skin with the same fervor he once reserved for his enemies, leaving the faint, wet impress of his teeth on her cheek as if to stake a claim that even the gods could not revoke. It is a dance of shadows and heat. He explores the interior of her mouth with a sensual, agonizing slowness, as if he is trying to map the very borders of her hesitation. He is a hunting dog on a leash of his own making, torn between the impulse to tear the world apart to keep her safe and the overwhelming, primal need to be the only thing she sees. He pulls away only when the air between them becomes a physical weight, his brow furrowed, his face a mask of thwarted desire and calculated gloom. He is a man who knows the exact temperature of his own madness, and he stops just before he consumes everything. He pivots, his voice still thick with the residue of their friction, and points toward the garden, toward a strange, newly raised mound of earth that breaks the symmetry of the landscape. He asks what it is, his composure fraying at the edges. Lee-yeon looks at him, the flush of their intimacy still burning on her skin, and offers a reply that hangs in the air, heavy and cryptic. She tells him, with the calm of a woman who has finally found the ground beneath her feet, that it is his grave. The silence that follows is absolute. The hunter freezes, the mask of the protector slips, and for one heartbeat, the roles are perfectly reversed. He is no longer the one holding the blade. He is the one staring into his own hollowed-out reflection, wondering just how much of him has already been buried in the soil of the life they are trying to build. The house has fallen into a deceptive, quiet domesticity. They move through the rooms like two halves of a fractured soul finally pressed back together, their days marked only by the shifting sunlight and the sudden, electric shock of the life stirring within Lee-yeon. When the baby moves, a tiny, insistent flutter against her palm, Kwon Chae-woo freezes. He is a man who has commanded death for years, yet he is utterly undone by the soft, rhythmic kick of his own legacy. In those moments, the hunter vanishes, replaced by a man who looks at his own hands as if they have just been taught to hold light for the very first time. But the night does not hold such gentle things. Lee-yeon wakes in the suffocating silence of midnight, her skin cold where his body should have been. The house is a hollow shell, echoing with the absence of the man who had become her shadow. She finds him in the yard, a spectre draped in a black, rain-slicked coat, illuminated only by the sickly, spectral glow of the moon. He is dragging a shovel, the metal shrieking against the earth, the rhythmic, grating sound of a man excavating his own ghost. She watches from the doorway, her breath hitching as he drives the blade into the soil. He is digging up the site he mockingly called his grave, his knuckles white, his expression a chilling mixture of obsession and mockery. He is not burying the past, he is unearthing it, desperate to ensure that the site of his supposed death remains nothing more than a shallow, empty lie. He turns to her, his face slick with dirt and moonlight, and the air between them turns sharp. He pulls a weathered wooden object from the dark earth, a relic of a promise he once carved for her. It is cold, damp, and impossibly preserved, a mockery of the time they lost. He thrusts it into her hands, his eyes burning with a dark, twisted humor. He tells her that if he is forbidden from the tools of his old trade, he will find other ways to fill the silence of the night, even if those ways are just as unsettling. She flees from him, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, seeking the sanctuary of the house. He watches her go, his laughter a low, vibrating hum that follows her into the dark. The next morning, the sun reveals the madness of the night. The garden, once a place of simple greenery, has been transformed into a glittering shrine. Diamonds, gold, and cold, hard jewels hang from the branches of the trees like strange, forbidden fruit. It is an excessive, gaudy display of devotion, a king's ransom strung up in the dirt to ensure she knows that he has not just come back to her, but that he has brought the world to her feet. He stands in the center of it, waiting. He has filled the yard with the spoils of his empire, a sparkling, expensive cage that makes the trees look as though they are weeping treasure. He is no longer asking for her to sign a paper, he is daring her to walk through the gate he has built. The jewels catch the morning light, casting 1,000 fractured rainbows across the lawn. They are beautiful, they are priceless, and they are utterly, terrifyingly sharp. Lee-yeon stands before the trees, the weight of the wooden flower still in her pocket, realizing that while he may have stopped digging, the earth beneath them is still waiting to be filled. The Hwaido island has undergone a metamorphosis that defies the gravity of its own dark history. Where once there was only the hum of illicit machinery and the sterile silence of the laboratory, there is now the persistent, swelling tide of music. Kwon Chae-woo, once a predator cloaked in shadows, now haunts the site of the vanished spirit tree like a secular saint. He plays for the wind, for the salt-crusted air, and for the growing crowd of pilgrims who arrive on the ferries just to witness the man who traded his blade for a bow. He is molding this island into a fortress of art, a sanctuary of sound. He moves through his days with the cold, calculated efficiency of a strategist, his voice sliding into the sharp cadence of German on clandestine calls, his fingers moving across his instrument with a precision that borders on the divine. They walk through the reed fields, the stalks whispering against their legs like secrets. Lee-yeon carries the future in the rounded arc of her belly, a fragile vessel for everything they are trying to salvage. When she speaks of names, of shadows from the past, his jealousy flares with a sudden, searing heat, a reminder that despite the music, the hunter still lurks just beneath the skin. He is a man who would rewrite the map of the world if it meant she would never have to look at another man, never have to speak another name. He whispers promises to the wind, swearing that the entire island will eventually sing her name. He is building her a paradise, but it is built on land he owns, controlled by hands that have learned the language of both melody and murder. Winter descends, a brutal, bone-chilling season that tests the island's endurance, yet inside their walls, the temperature remains unnervingly constant. He protects the trees as if they were his own flesh, wrapping them against the East Sea gales with the same devotion he pours into the baby clothes, the nursery, and the secret, lantern-lit groves he prepares for her. One afternoon, amidst the dappled light of the forest, the music fades into a heavy, resonant silence. Lee-yeon watches him, the man who was once a titan of the Berlin Philharmonic, now kneeling in the dirt to care for his instrument. The contrast is too stark to ignore. She sees his shoulders, the breadth of his back, the lethal grace that never truly left him. A seed of doubt takes root in her heart, a quiet, gnawing fear that a man like him cannot truly be tamed by the hearth, that the scent of blood will always be more intoxicating than the scent of pine. She asks if he is bored, if the life of a house husband is a cage he is already beginning to regret. She remembers the mask, the night, the predator that lived in his eyes. She imagines he misses the power, the thrill of the hunt, the absolute dominion he held over the lives of others. But Chae-woo only smiles. It is a slow, serpentine look, entirely devoid of the boredom she fears. He does not tell her that the music is merely a symphony to mask the sound of his own ascent. He does not tell her that while he plays, he has been busy consolidating his grip on the Kwon legacy, turning the entire family machinery toward his own ends. He has not left the darkness behind. He has simply brought it home, carefully pruned and manicured, until it looks exactly like a life of domestic bliss. He stands, his silhouette sharp against the light, and reaches for her hand. He is the master of the island, the architect of their peace, and the heir to a throne he has no intention of abandoning. Lee-yeon believes they are safe, drifting in a garden of her own making, unaware that the thorns have already begun to bloom. The empire of the Kwon family is not so much collapsing as it is quietly being erased. Above ground, Kwon Chae-woo operates with the sterile precision of a surgeon, establishing welfare foundations and dismantling the cruel, archaic machinery of his own legacy. Below ground, the ruins of their old life remain, a silent monument to the brother who was once his shadow. Hwaido has become a ghost of its former self, a place where the air no longer tastes of fear, but of salt, music, and the slow, inevitable creep of spring. Chae-woo has built an invisible fence around his world, a web of surveillance and protection so dense that not a single threat can pierce it. He is a man who patrols his boundaries with the obsessive focus of a hound, yet in the sanctuary of their home, he is trapped by a different kind of hunger. They exist in a state of suspended desire. The pregnancy, a fragile miracle, has turned their intimacy into a tense, agonizing ritual. He is a creature of deep, carnal appetites, forced to restrain the very fire that once consumed them. He suffers from a peculiar, dark humor about his own confinement, often joking about his physical frustration with the dry, biting wit of a man who has traded his violent impulses for a life of domestic longing. To him, every moment spent watching Lee-yeon sleep is a victory, a hard-won peace he guards with a ferocity that borders on the divine. The tension breaks during a quiet, sun-drenched moment. Lee-yeon, sensing the depths of his unspoken devotion, speaks to the silence that has always sat between them. She admits, with a clarity that finally heals the jagged edges of their past, that the child is not the only reason she remains. Even if they had never conceived, even if their world had never been blessed by the life stirring beneath her heart, she would have chosen him. Again and again, she would have returned to the flames, to the shadows, and to the arms of the man who decided to love her despite the blood on his hands. Her admission is a key that unlocks a dam long held fast. Chae-woo, the man who stood unmoved before tragedy and fire, finally breaks. As he presses his face against her belly, his breathing falters, and the hardened armor of his stoicism gives way to the raw, salt-warm release of tears. It is the end of his winter, a season of ice and isolation finally thawing under the gentle, persistent heat of a woman who refuses to be afraid of him. In the forest beyond their windows, the first signs of spring have already begun to stir. Ju-baek, the young collector of creatures, wanders the woods with his net and his jars, his world filled with the simple, miraculous life of insects. He finds them there, in the quiet clearing, the man who plays like a cello and the woman who grounds him, and witnesses a moment of profound, human vulnerability. He stands motionless, the dragonfly net heavy in his hand, as he realizes that the greatest story in the forest is not to be found in the wings of a beetle or the flight of a bird. It is the story of two survivors learning how to be human. In that moment, a quiet vow is made. It is not written in ink or signed in blood. It is a gift, simple and pure, that will one day become the first chapter of a life that nobody thought would ever exist. The forest clearing is bathed in the soft, liminal light of early spring, a place where the air smells of turned earth and the impending bloom of new life. In the quiet shade of the trees, a peculiar ceremony is taking place. It is not the grand, orchestrated affair one might expect from the heir to a crumbling empire. It is an intimate, strange, and wildly sincere rehearsal. Ju-baek, the young observer of the natural world, stands before them with the gravity of a high priest. He does not speak of human vows or legal contracts. Instead, he speaks of the animal kingdom, the monogamous devotion of the grey wolf, the protective instinct of the pinecone lizard, and the lifelong partnership of the white-headed eagle. It is a lesson in nature's fidelity, recited with the earnest, encyclopedic rhythm of a child who understands the world better through beetles and predators than through the complex, messy morality of men. Kwon Chae-woo, the man who once wielded the power to break lives, sits cradling Lee-yeon against his shoulder. He listens to the boy's unorthodox litany of animal virtues with a terrifying, absolute focus. When the boy reaches the end of his rehearsed list, the air in the clearing feels electrified. For Chae-woo, this is no longer a game. It is a blueprint for the life he has clawed out of the darkness. Lee-yeon, hidden beneath the fall of a heavy blanket, tries to stifle a laugh, but the sound is caught in the sudden, blooming warmth of her own heart. She realizes that the man who once moved through the world like a shadow has finally decided to cast a permanent light. He leans down, his lips brushing her forehead with a terrifying tenderness, and whispers a promise that bridges the gap between the man he was and the man he is becoming. He will live as her flower, as her roots, and as the ground beneath her feet. The commotion begins at the edges of the clearing, the sound of voices, the laughter of guests, and the bustling arrival of a life that is no longer hidden in the shadows of Hwaido. They are coming to celebrate, to witness, and to acknowledge the impossible transformation that has taken place in the heart of this forest. Chae-woo's gaze shifts toward the cello case nearby, where a secret wooden box holds the paper trail of their survival, every scrap of gratitude and longing Lee-yeon ever whispered to the trees during their darkest hours. These notes are the pebbles that paved their way to this spring, a testament to the fact that they are no longer running. As the guests spill into the clearing, the world they built seems to expand, absorbing the chaos of the outside and turning it into something rhythmic and harmonious. There is no need for masks, no need for the cold, calculating defenses of the past. The predator has become the protector, and the survivor has become the heart of a home. That night, as the dream of the future settles over her, Lee-yeon finds herself in a world of storybooks. She sees a tale written by a young naturalist, a story of trees that sing and roots that hold firm against the turning of the seasons. It is a letter to a child yet to be born, a promise that in their world of music, nature, and shared breath, love is not a vulnerability, it is the deepest, most enduring law of all. The summer is coming, another season of light, and the winter of their souls has finally, irrevocably, thawed. The story ends, but the roots, deep, tangled, and unbreakable, have only just begun to grow. And just like that, the roots we watch take hold in the shadow of Hwaido have finally broken through to the light. We have reached the end of Lee-yeon and Kwon Chae-woo's journey, a story that began in a garden of lies and ended in the quiet, terrifying beauty of a promise kept. When we started this together, I didn't know if a hunter could ever truly be a protector, or if a survivor could ever trust a man who once walked in the dark. But here we are, watching them build a life not on the wreckage of their past, but on the resilience of a love that refused to burn out. Thank you for choosing the Light Novel Recap Lounge to witness this. You were the first ones to step into this clearing with me. You were the ones who analyzed every flicker of Chae-woo's mask and every quiet defiance from Lee-yeon. This channel was born from the desire to tell stories that haunt, move, and challenge us. And there is no better story to serve as our foundation than this one. We've walked through fire, navigated the labyrinth of obsession, and finally found our way to a spring that feels like a miracle. But if you've enjoyed this descent into the complex, darker corners of romance and redemption, stay close. Because the garden is only just beginning to grow. We have so many more secrets to uncover, more broken worlds to visit, and more characters waiting to tell us their truth. I am incredibly grateful to have you as part of this community, and I cannot wait to share what we're digging up next. If you loved this journey, make sure you're subscribed and the notifications are on. The forest is vast, and I have a feeling the next story we tell is going to stay with you long after the video ends. Until the next chapter, thank you for being the heart of this lounge.